is Jim, and I'm a 4-decade-long believer who studied Scripture according to church doctrines for the majority of that time, until about 5 years ago when I realized what I had been hearing all along, but it registered to me for the first time in a way that I knew it needed to affect my behavior and my belief system. And what I learned about 5 years ago, or what I embraced about 5 years ago, is that I don't belong to a Gentile-dominated church. I belong to Israel. The church that exists literally is not a new body, a new concept. It is literally just the continuation of Israel from the old writings. So the church today is not, it's not designed to be a separate entity operating with a second covenant and a new covenant. No, it is the continuation of the story of Israel that began from the beginning of Scriptures and runs all the way through the end of Scriptures. And so understanding that led me to the necessary conclusion that to understand then, if we're Israel and partaking in the promises of Israel, then we also are partaking in the responsibilities of Israel. And what does that mean? So that sent me out on a study of the old writings that, we call the Old Testament in the Scriptures, and not just the ones that were canonized and limited by Judaism and the church, but some of the Scriptures that have been hidden from us for millennia now. So I started studying these to start gleaning what I need to understand from them, to walk out, to learn what is His will, what is His way, and to begin walking it out, learning how to do that, which has put me at odds with church doctrine, because what I find is that the doctrines taught in the Scriptures that is the Old Testament are different than the doctrines that the church are teaching us about the new writings. And through the new writings, they're teaching us new concepts through that. So I have been spending much time in the old writings, and as I was spending time, I began to realize patterns and see common themes throughout the writings of Moses and the various prophets. And what became very evident was that we had the rise of Israel, but then we had the predicted fall at the time of Moses, the predicted fall and judgment, and then scattering of Israel. And then once we had the failure, the rebellion, and the fall and the judgment of Israel, we started having a need for a Messiah that rose to us. It started with the writings of, it's elsewhere. I mean, if we could find our Messiah in the writings of Enoch, which would have predated everything Moses did. But we began in our Scriptures to see the rise of the need of a Messiah to deliver fallen Israel, the people in their fallen state. And so we have these themes consistent throughout the prophets, where we have the fall, the failure, and then the judgment and the fall and the scattering of Israel. But then we have the promised regathering of Israel back into a land. So, when they came out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim, they went into the promised land, the land of splendor that existed at the time. But now they've been scattered. Israel's been scattered out into the world. And the call is that when the time comes, at the second coming of Messiah, Yahushua, there will be a regathering of Israel from everywhere they've been dispersed. And we have to then discern who are those that are going to be regathered. The chosen and elect is common theme for that grouping of people. But I will also say from the old writings, we'll hear them referred to as the remnant of Israel, the righteous of Israel, etc. So there is this theme of this regathering, and it is consistent, and that is future event, as is the covenant. I know that the church teaches that we're living in the new covenant, but we're not living in the new covenant. It becomes pretty clear that the new covenant, or the covenant of peace, begins with the second coming. Now, with His first coming, with Messiah's first coming, He assured that covenant. He assured the promises to Israel. He assured it through His blood, through His life, perfect life, and then His death and His resurrection. He has now guaranteed that those of us who by choice receive it it's there for the taking now. He's assured us. He's guaranteed that, and His blood bought that. But the reality, right now we still live in the promise of that second covenant, that renewed or new covenant, that covenant of peace. That is still a future promise that comes and presents itself. All the promises that exist in that covenant are going to come to us at his second coming. At his second coming will be the regathering of Israel, that gathering, that resurrection. The church will call it the rapture. Okay. So these are the themes part of the themes that I've been seeing, and I've made some videos related to it. And as I was I've been going through the prophets chronologically, and I started with some of the minor prophets because they came up first, but I'm in the midst of Isaiah, and I began to realize in Isaiah that there was a reference in chapters 26 and 27 to the themes of rapture that we understood from church teaching, that we understand in church teaching. We understand it differently, but we still understand it from church teaching. And I correlated the two and created a video called The Rapture in Isaiah. And recently I had a comment appear in that video on YouTube from a gentleman or person that goes by the handle at Aletheia-KM8JX. I don't know if this is a man or a woman. I suspect it's a man, but I don't really know. I'm going to refer to him as Aletheia, and I'm going to refer to him as him. And I'm sorry, I just don't know your name and I don't know your gender for sure. So, but he commented and asked, he said he'd be interested. Well, here, let me just read his comment to you. It reads like this. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on Isaiah chapter 11, particularly chapter 11 verses 10 through 13 in terms of the second Exodus, in addition to Jeremiah 16 verses 14 through 15 and Ezekiel chapter 20 verses 33 through 36 as supporting the idea of a second Exodus and being taken into a wilderness as happened in the first Exodus. Ezekiel goes on to narrate how life will be experienced by the rejoining of the two sticks, Ephraim and Judah, in the land during the millennial reign, ruled by a Davidic prince, in a newly formed Israel. Ezekiel chapter 48 clearly delineates the new tribal land allotments that will be established during Yahushua's, which is Jesus's, millennial reign, and it differs from the description of the New Jerusalem, which does not descend, from what I understand, until after Ha-Satan, which is the Satan, is thrown into the lake of fire after the 1,000-year rule of our King Yahushua. So he's really not asking me questions so much in this comment as he's asking for my thoughts. But this is my second try to make a video related to this, and I found in my first effort that I keep calling them questions. And forgive me, he's not asking questions. I think he already knows his answers. This is not the first time he's commented inside of some of my videos, and I have come to respect this person as someone who knows his stuff. And whether we would be in agreement on what we're finding in Scripture, I don't know, because I've not had that kind of contact with him where I could, have some back and forth with him, which I would love to do. But I just haven't been able to establish that kind of contact. But I will just say this gentleman, doesn't need my opinion. He has an opinion, and I'm sure he's not really asking questions. He's just doing what I do, which is seeking more information on this. And what are your thoughts on this? I have my thoughts, but what are your thoughts? And so that's what he's done here, and that's what I'm glad to offer in this video. And that's the point of this video. It gives me a framework from which to cover some things that are of tremendous interest to me. So let me show you what I've done. I've taken his comment here and I've placed it in an outline here so that I can just go through it and speak to it. And let me just start at the beginning here, and let me comment here. I've made his comments will be in blue just so you can differentiate. So everything he has written is in blue here. And here's his statement where he says, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on. And then here's this first separation of things that he commented to. And it was Isaiah chapter 11, and particularly chapter 11, verses 10 through 13, in terms of the second Exodus. Well, before I even begin, I need to comment to what the second Exodus is. I think that my experience in the when I was walking in church doctrines would be a familiarity with a concept. You hear the term second Exodus, and you might even associate that with the rapture. You might. But I don't know that most in the church would give it that much thought, although clearly some do. And some will, from church doctrines, begin to try to just describe it and speak to it from the positions of church doctrines, from their positions of what the church has taught them to understand about Israel and about the old writings. I find mostly as I go through the descriptions of second Exodus from people who are trying to describe it and spiritualize it from the perspective of church doctrines, it just can't. It's just so errant. I mean, it's just not good error or good doctrine, good teaching, good understanding. But I think there are circles that spend more time. I think when you get into various sections of, say, Jewish understanding, Judaism, or even people who would not necessarily identify with Judaism or being a Jew, might be of Israel or might be a Messianic Jew, these folks have a different idea of what the second Exodus is. And I think that mostly they would think of the second Exodus as something for natural men. And when I say natural men, I'm hopefully going to use this consistently throughout the video. When I say natural men, I mean men who are still living in the flesh, existing in this fleshly body that contains our spirit. And this fleshly body is a problem for us. It is at enmity with him. It's at enmity with our own spirit. It creates desires and problems and things. And this is the body that's going to die. It's appointed for this body to die. And that's why all men are going to die at least one time. And this natural body is going to be replaced with a spirit body that may have components of flesh in it. I don't really know for sure. I mean, I've heard people try to talk about what that body might be made up of, but we know that the body that this natural body that is going to die is going to be replaced with a eternal body, a body that will live forever and never die again. Chai, if I'm saying that right, AHI, eternal life. But I think that going back to the second Exodus and how I think most of Israel and Jewish thought processes, when they think of the second Exodus, I believe they are thinking of natural men making their way back into the current land mass that is there, an expanded land mass, because the promises to Abraham were larger, and promises to Abraham and Isaac were larger than what we see Israel ever having become in their days in the land. But still, they envision, I'm reasonably confident they envision natural men making their way back into the current land as we understand the land to be now. But there's plenty of people, and I think I fit into this. When I think of the second Exodus, I am thinking of the regathering, which is in a line with the rapture of the church teaching and what we read in that we've come to know as the rapture in the new writings, in the letters of Paul and in the Olivet Discourse, when the rapture is described. Rapture being not a scriptural word, but just a descriptive word of a catching away of the people. And Paul teaches us that first the dead are caught up, and then we who are living when he comes that second time. And this is all happening when he comes back that second time, when he comes on the clouds and appears in the clouds with his Malachim, which are the angels. When he appears, they're going to gather the people first from the graves, the resurrection of the dead, and then those who are living at the time are going to be transformed in the blink of an eye. And together they're going to be caught up in the clouds with Yahushua, and we will from that moment on be together with him evermore. And initially we are caught up and taken away to where? I believe I think most people will say, well, to heaven. Well, okay, I guess. But really in heaven is the place where Yahushua has gone to prepare a place for his people, his chosen and his elect that he shares with us in the Gospel of John. Behold, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's home are many mansions or many living places, our abode. So I believe that when we're caught up in the sky, once we're caught there, we are taken up to our eternal abode that exists in the heavenlies right now, where it's been created for us as the New Jerusalem, a very large mass of living space. Some cities, some land, some what we would call rural land, mountains, forests, hills. It's a very large place. And so just like, a large spot of land on earth would have so many different geographies to it and just a makeup to it, so is that land that is being prepared for us up there. And that's where we're caught up to and taken, where we're going to have the wedding supper of the Lamb and spend our time with him up there initially. And then when it's time for him, while we're up there having the wedding supper of the Lamb, we're going to see judgment down on the earth, the bold judgments and the things taking place down here. But we know from the scriptures of the day of the Lord and in the prophets that Yahushua has to come back and finish the day of the Lord judgments, or day of Yahweh judgments. So once the wedding supper of the Lamb is finished, he sends us to our abodes. Go into your rooms, go my people, go my children, into your rooms and rest for a little while until the displeasure is past. And then he, along with his Malachim, riding on the white horses, come back to earth. And that's where we get the descriptions of him when in his white garment, but it's stained with blood, because he and his Malachim come to earth to finish the judgment, to do war against the kings that have gathered under the beast and his Antichrist. I'm sorry, the beast and his prophet, the Antichrist, culminating in the, Armageddon, the battles of Armageddon. And then Yahushua and his Malachim taking care of them, staining their clothes in blood, and then going through the land, in my opinion, going through the land, the area that has historically been known as Israel, going through that land and completely devastating it. The mountains will be shaken down. The valleys will be raised up. The sea, the Mediterranean Sea, will be filled. And that whole area, I believe, will become the foundation, the place where the New Jerusalem is going to come down. Once he has finished his judgment and it's time for him to reign, then the New Jerusalem comes down and sets down on this land that has been prepared, as we see in the prophet Joel and in other scriptures. That's my framework. That is how scriptures have led me to imagine it's going to be. I'm sure that my imaginations are wrong. I think all of us are going to be surprised when the day comes and see how it really plays out. But this is what scripture has led me to picture as what's going to happen. So to return to this video, the point of this video, we have this gathering together of the people, the righteous, the redeemed of Israel, that will include the church, all of the chosen and elect. And when he comes back and we are raptured up, this is the second Exodus in my mind. This is the second Exodus, at least part of it, if not the fullness of it. But if you ask me, I'm going to say that's not the fullness of it, because I find throughout the old writings men in what should be the lands of Israel. So when we start seeing the lands of Israel appearing in the promises, when they are regathered into the land, when we start seeing that land and we start seeing men there, we have to start asking who men, natural men there. We have to start asking who these men are and what is that land. Is it the land as we know it today as Israel, or is it the land that will come down from the heavenlies, will come down and replace what is there and sit down and represent the cities that have been rebuilt and the land that has been restored, etc. So we have to answer those questions. Who are the natural people residing in this land, and what specifically is the land that they will be brought back into? Again, I will just say, I think that, well, in summary, let me say, I will say that I believe that the second Exodus includes the gathering together of the remnant, the believers, the chosen, the elect, those who participate in the first resurrection, up into the land as it exists in the heavens. But once the the judgment is past. The day of Yahweh judgment is past, and the reign of our sovereign, our Davidic sovereign, Yahushua, is to begin, and we bring down the land of the New Jerusalem, Mount Zion, the Kodesh mountain, the holy mountain, the separated mountain. When we bring all these lands down, and which is where he's going to live and we're going to live, and now we have brought it to the earth. We have left the heavens, and now we have brought it back to the earth, where it will rest, in my opinion, forever going forward. Well, once that happens, then I think it likely that we will begin to see the survivors of natural Israel that are still out and about in the world begin to make their way to the lands. So I think we have a combination of a spiritual rapture, catching away, resurrection, second exodus into the land, and we have an exodus of the people from wherever, natural people, from wherever they are once the lands come down, who make their way into the lands to populate it. And then we have, during that, well, it's more than 1,000, the 1,000 year, the millennial reign that we talk about is really measuring 1,000 years, but that 1,000 years is really just the captivity of the devil. The actual reign described even in Revelation goes beyond 1,000 years, because after the 1,000 years, if we are resurrected to reign with him at the beginning of the 1,000 years, and then Satan is let loose at the end of 1,000 years, then we have that period of time once he's let loose, when he goes out, according to Revelation, he goes out to deceive the nations once again. Well, how long does that take? Well, I think in the church we imagine an awful lot of things, but as I've come across some of the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you get to the War Scroll, which I think is Scripture. I think it's Scripture. I think it's hidden Scripture from us. If you read it, you'll have to make your own assessment of it. But when I read that War Scroll, it cannot be anything. Unless they've hidden history from us, it cannot be anything that's been described in Scripture or in history. What we see described in this War Scroll, never has Israel existed in such a way that we would see something like what is described there. But after 1,000 years of living in the land, and with a priesthood, and with a structure, well, suddenly you can begin to see how in those War Scrolls, when Gog and Magog mentioned in the War Scrolls, or Gog is anyway, when they begin to march on the Kodesh lands, across the breadth. I mean, we'll read about this in Revelation, and again in Ezekiel 38, or maybe I should say first in Ezekiel and again in Revelation, where Gog is marching on this nation of Israel that has been living at peace in the lands. And then once they've been living there for 1,000 years, you can then imagine the structure of the battles that are described in the War Scrolls, because it's going to take a unified, prosperous Israel to mount up such garrisons and such. So I'm just saying that it's going to be longer than 1,000 years. That I think the war itself that is described, that we in Revelation, is just him with the breath of his mouth just wiping them out. The war, I don't think it. I mean, I think that's fine to summarize it in that manner, which is not unusual in Scripture. But the actual war itself takes at least 22 years, if I remember what I read in the War Scroll. So the period of time after Satan is released is probably not just a few years. It's probably some centuries, maybe. I don't know. But I believe that even once that period of time after Satan has been released again, and before he is thrown into the lake of fire, along with everybody who is then brought into the second resurrection, because after the period of time that Satan has been released and he's led this rebellion, after that, at some point, is the great white throne judgment, where all of the dead, past, and those who are going to live in the future, all of them are going to be raised up and then made to account for what they've done. And those who are not found in the Lamb's Book of Life are headed to the lake of fire. And once that has happened, once all of mankind in the natural has been either those who are living are going to face the resurrection, and if their name isn't in the Lamb's Book of Life, their natural body is going to be thrown, along with their spirit, is going to be thrown in the Lamb's Book of, into the lake of fire. But all those who are resurrected, if they're resurrected into flesh, then their flesh and their spirit is going to be thrown into the lake of fire. If their spirit is going to be resurrected without their flesh, then their spirit's going to be thrown into the lake of fire. But my point is that once we have that second resurrection and that second judgment, it's over, and death is over, because there's no more natural man left on earth. And from that time forward and through eternity, we now have the reign of Yahushua with the legitimate resurrected spiritual body, whether it's flesh or what the components of it are, we don't really know, but that eternal body. So from that time forward, we will be living in a new chapter, in a chapter we don't really see written about in our scriptures, but referenced. And like the 8th day, you might hear it referred to as the 8th day, where once sin is dealt with and death has been put away, the grave, Sheol, has been also cast into the lake of fire. It's over. And from that time forward, eternity begins with us serving our Yahushua, serving our Elohim and our Master. And those days are coming. I have severely digressed from the point of this video, but I think it's all contained in this idea of a second Exodus. Now, it's also possible, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to end it here, but it's also possible, if you're going to go by what I'm saying, that that would be a third Exodus. And so maybe the rapture isn't really considered an Exodus. And maybe it's just the natural men coming in being the second Exodus. Or maybe it's the catching away that would be the second Exodus, and the natural men coming into the land, if that's what happens, is also part of the second Exodus. I don't really know. But what we do know is there's a reference to a second time and a second coming of a second Exodus, a second regathering, a second Exodus from wherever you're at. The first Exodus was a exit from Egypt or Mitzrayim, and the second exit will be from the lands in the wilderness of the people where we have all been dispersed, all of the chosen, the elect, where they have been dispersed, and this would be the second Exodus. All right, and let me also say before I get started working on this that I don't know what Alethea's position is on the second Exodus. If I don't see where he's made it clear to me anyway what his thoughts are, and I would be interested in knowing, because, and I'll also say before I move on here that I fully intend to be and hope to be part of that first resurrection. And so much of this is immaterial, because what I really need to do is just figure out how to find out what his will is and do his Torah, and take part in the first resurrection. And then all things are going to take their place for me, and that's okay. More than okay, that's awesome. But when it comes to trying to figure out more of Scripture and the details, I think that for me personally, finding answers, and when Scriptures continue to reveal, and the picture, every time you can put a puzzle piece in place and see the larger picture with every puzzle piece you can put in place, the picture becomes clearer and more affirming that the message and our belief has merit, we have reason to be hoping in the Elohim of Israel as our creator, and the creation account, and this historical account of his elect and his chosen. It makes sense of the world for me. And so that's one of the reasons why I pursue information and pursue the details. The two reasons are that I want to do what I'm supposed to do, find out what I'm supposed to do it, and participate in that first resurrection. And the second reason is I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel good about the Elohim I have chosen to follow, and his messaging and what he's communicated to us. And I do that by continuing to learn his ways, not just his ways, but his bigger picture. I mean, like Job, and like Ezra was told, it's too big. We're too finite to grasp what he's doing, and I get that. But the more I can grasp, the more real he becomes to me, and I'm seeking that. I long for that. Okay, and let me also say, I did input and copy and paste in my little document here the passages that he has outlined. But instead of reading from here, I'm going to go to the scriptures themselves and just read it. And let me explain to you that I'm reading from the Yah scriptures, which is a derivative of the Hallelujah scriptures, which is a derivative of the C.J. Coster work, and in a way from the scriptures of the ISR. And the reason that I like to read from this translation is twofold. It is a restored name, and I like using the restored name. I like using Yahuwah. Not that I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but his name isn't Lord either. And Yahushua, rather than use an anglicized Greek English word, I'm going to use an English word for his Hebrew name of Yahushua. And there are other things that I like about it, but that's really not the point of this. The thing that I really read it for, and the thing that I appreciate it for, at least as much for, and maybe more so, is that it is a literal translation, and a good literal translation. I have had in my studies times when I really needed to seek what the underlying Hebrew was saying, whether it's the Hebrew of the Masoretic text or the Greek of the Septuagint Old Testament, or if it's the Greek of the New Testament writings, the new writings. No matter what it is, it seems like more often than not, the literal translation that I find in the Hallelujah and Yah scriptures is the best literal translation, the least affected by doctrine and, the impartation of doctrine, the least affected by extra words being put in and utilized. It's just been the most straightforward, literal version that I've been able to locate, and that's what I'm after, because I want to, and I read from that so that I'm not reading everybody else's thought. To the extent that I can, I'm not reading everybody else's doctrinal positions. I'm reading what the Hebrew wrote, from the Hebrew and from the Greek to the best that we can do in our English translations. So I'm reading from the Yah scriptures, and for some, they're just not going to be familiar with words. I will try to explain as I go, so that it's not, for those who are not familiar, they're not overwhelmed with too much of it. So I'll try to explain as I go. So let me go ahead and read verse 10 of chapter 11, which is what he's referenced here. And it reads like this. Let me make sure I have my pencil going here. And in that day there shall be a root of Yeshe, which is Jesse, root of Jesse, which we all understand to be messianic. David was the son of Jesse, and the Messiah comes from David. So that's why we have this root of Yeshe, the root of Jesse, which is a messianic Yahushua reference, standing as a banner to the people. So, in that day, what day? I often think of that as the day of Yahweh. And the day of Yahweh includes his retribution, but it also includes the rapture, the gathering together of his elect and chosen. So in that day there shall be a root of Yeshe, the Messiah, standing as a banner, standing as a sign to the people. And unto him, the Messiah, the Gentiles shall seek, and his rest shall be esteemed. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh puts his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left. From Ashur and from Mitzrayim, from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar, from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. Mitzrayim is Egypt, by the way. Ashur is Assyria. I'm not sure what Pathros and Cush is. I'm pretty confident Cush is the areas of the Chaldeans, I think. And but Shinar is also the area of the Chaldeans. So I'd have to really look that up again. But the concept is that they are the remnant is left throughout the world, because that's the scattered state that we find ourselves in, that Israel finds themselves in right now. Verse 12, and he shall raise a banner for the nations, and gather the outcasts of Israel, and assemble the dispersed of Yehuda. So note that he's gathering the outcasts of Israel. So these are the dispersed of the northern kingdom of Israel, and then he's going to assemble the dispersed of the southern kingdom of Yehuda from the four corners of the earth. So this is all together. This is all 12 of the tribes, or 13 of the tribes, and they're going to be gathered from the four corners of the earth when he raises the banner. And the envy of Ephraim, which is Israel, the northern kingdom often became known or referenced as Ephraim because Ephraim was the dominant tribe. Ephraim was the dominant tribe, and so the members of that tribe, the Ephraim, shall, and that is a reference to the northern kingdom, sorry to be redundant there, shall turn aside, and the adversaries of Yehuda be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda, and Yehuda not trouble Ephraim, as was taking place in the days when the two kingdoms were side by side. They were at odds in trouble together. So his question or his comment was, what he's asking for perspective on is those verses in terms of the second Exodus. So the second Exodus is what he's talking here, is this passage right here in verse 11, where Yahushua stands up, or he puts his hand in again a second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left. So there is clearly a second time, or a second effort being made, a second time where he is gathering his people. The first time is broadly considered to be Israel, and as they were gathered out of Mitzrayim, the first time then brought into the land from Egypt, from Mitzrayim. So clearly this is a reference to that second Exodus. But when he says the remnant of his people, this strikes me as that could be two things, I think. It could be that nothing is left of his people except a remnant, but I don't think so. I think we're going to find, and I'm going to show you in a second here, that it isn't the numbers of the bloodlines of Israel that are a remnant. It is a remnant of the bloodline of Israel, which are as the sands of the sea, that will be brought and gathered, recovered, and brought back into the land. So with regard to his comment and his thought on this, my thought is that we are speaking this second time, a second Exodus, if you want to call it an Exodus, but the second time that he is doing something to bring his people out of wherever they were and into the land. This time, it will not be the entirety of Israel as it was the first time. It will be but a remnant of the people that are left and brought into the land. And I'm not sure, did it say here? It's just saying it's going to gather and assemble them. It doesn't really say here that he's going to bring them back in the land, as we will find elsewhere. But let me also go back further a little bit into chapter 10 and get some perspective and some context for this. Because when we go back to this passage in chapter 10, verse 20, it reads like this: in that day it shall be that the remnant of Israel, it's going back to what was just, he's just actually, before he said it in chapter 11, when he sets his hand a second time to recover the remnant of his people, which is Israel. Up here, and what he said first was, in that day it shall be that a remnant of Israel, and those who have escaped of the house of Jacob, which is Jacob, never again lean upon him who smote them. Well, who is him who smote them? Is that Egypt? Is that Assyria? Don't really know for sure who he's suggesting they're leaning upon. We probably could go back and get a little better idea, because where we at? This is Isaiah, and were they turning to, there was a time when the king of Yehuda, I believe, turned to Egypt for their assistance, and maybe that's what it's referencing. But instead, they shall lean upon Yahuwah, the Kadash one, which is the holy one, the separated one, the one that is set apart of Israel in truth. So they will never again lean upon him who smote them, which I think it probably is Egypt here, but I'm not sure. And shall lean upon Yahuwah, the Kadash one of Israel. A remnant shall return. So that second time, putting his hand, this is, Yahushua, the Messiah, the root of Jesse, when he puts his hand a second time to gather, this is the remnant that shall return, the remnant of Jacob to the mighty El. For though your people, O Israel, be as the sand. So this is why I'm saying that the numbers of natural Israel are probably as the sand of the sea. Vast numbers as promised to Abraham and Isaac. But yet only a remnant of them shall return. And I have, in the themes that I have identified in the prophets and in the writings and the scriptures, is that the remnant is the righteous Israel. The remnant is always that small minority group within Israel that is being obedient, doing the Torah, seeking Yahweh, seeking his ways. And that stands in contrast to the vast majority of them that rebelled, went their own ways. And though they, the rebels, be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant shall return. And then he goes on to say, a decisive end, overflowing righteousness. So when the end comes, it will overflow with righteousness. That's how I read that. For the Adon, Yahweh of hosts, is making a complete end as decided in the midst of the earth. What is that complete end? We have these last times coming that will involve the beast and his prophet, the Antichrist, but that's not the end. Because then we have that 1,000-year period of time where Satan is bound, and then another period of time where he's released. And then we have a period of time until the second resurrection and the second judgment, and then all of death and Sheol and the grave is all done with and put away. Is that the end that he's talking about here? A complete end as decided in the midst of the earth? Maybe, because there are a couple different spots where we could say, is that the end? But really the end of the period of mankind, the period of natural man will come to its end with the second resurrection that follows the millennial reign, if you want to call it that. But it's much longer than 1,000-year reign. But that period of time, that peace, that time following the release of Satan. All right, let's see if there's anything more. Okay, and then let's go ahead and read where he wrote, in addition to Jeremiah 16, 14, and 15. Let's go read that real quick. And it reads like this. Therefore, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when it is no longer said, said, Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Mitzrayim. But 15. Let me just start again. Verse 14. Therefore, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when it is no longer says, Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Mitzrayim. But Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands where he has driven them. For I shall bring them back into their land I gave their fathers. So in Isaiah here, it didn't talk about the fact that they were gathered back into their land. I mean, it references it because they were assembled and they were gathered, and when they had to be gathered to some place, here Jeremiah is making it clear that they are gathered back into their land. So let me go back and comment to these two passages before we go on to Ezekiel here. First of all, I've already expounded upon the second Exodus, so I really say that I just agree that this is a reference to a second. It's not called Exodus here, but a second gathering of his elect. You know, the first time through, the first elect was all of the nation of Israel, even the rebels, because all of them were brought out of Egypt. But the second time through, I think that the first resurrection, this first recovering that we're talking about, is of the remnant, of the elect, of the chosen, which is a minority of all of Israel, a minority of the world. And that is what is gathered together the second time. And if you want to call that a second Exodus, okay. I'm not sure that the actual word second Exodus is used in the old scriptures. We'll have to see. I don't think it comes up in this, will come up in this study. But in this case of Isaiah, it was just referred to as a second time. And the recovery of the remnant a second time. So according to Isaiah chapter 11, it's the remnant that we're referencing here, and a recovery of the remnant that second time, a minority of Israel, which I believe to be the those who participate in the first resurrection, the remnant, the righteous of Israel, and does not include what I think will later be an exodus of people to the land of the seed of Israel that was not raptured, that remained alive and survived the day of Yahweh judgments, and once the land comes down, that they will come in. I'm beating it to death, but I will also say that here's just confirmation that they are being brought back from the lands where they had been driven back to the land which I gave their fathers, and we're going to have to, and I will come back to this, we're going to have to think about, in my opinion, what this land is that they're coming back to. Is it the exact same land? Will it be the same topography and geography that they understood from their first foray into the land of splendor? I don't think so. I think this land that they're going to be coming back into will have a different topography, and it will be different because it's the land that's going to come down from the heavenlies. Okay, let's move on to Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 33 through 36, as supporting the idea of a second Exodus and being taken into a wilderness as happened in the first Exodus. So let's visit that passage. It's chapter 20, and here's the passage. And it reads like this. Let me get my pencil. It reads like this in verse 33. As I live, declares the Adon, which is Master, Yahweh, do not I, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with wrath poured out, reign over you? And I shall bring you out from the peoples, and gather you out of the lands where you are scattered, with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with wrath poured out. And I shall bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and shall enter into judgment with you face to face there, as I entered into judgment with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Mitzrayim, so I shall enter into judgment with you, declares the Adon. Well, if you go back and you read the early parts of chapter 20 here, you will see he's talking about how when they came out of the land, and he was bringing them, he delivered them the first time out of the land of Egypt, and he brought all of them. But they were rebellious. They were stiff-necked. They were hard-hearted. Now, that's not the wording used in Ezekiel here. Ezekiel refers to them as rebellious. And even after they rebelled in such a manner that they were not allowed to enter. So we had this wilderness period in the wilderness of Egypt, which is outside of Egypt. So they wandered in the wilderness and in the desert for that 40 years that they wandered until this adult generation passed on. But then he goes on in Ezekiel to say, well, the children were also instructed, don't walk like your fathers, walk differently. But ultimately, according to Ezekiel, the children also rebelled and walked against them. So really, neither the parents or the children ever really had a heart for Yahweh. His chosen people did not have a heart for Yahweh, the large majority of them. And so by the time we are getting to this passage that he's referencing here, I think it's a legitimate question. Now, this is hard. I think these passages are a little hard, but not impossible. Let me see if I just weigh in with my opinion of it. And when he says, as I live, declares the Adon Yahweh, do not I, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with wrath poured out, reign over you? The question is this a question for them in that day? Think about the days of Ezekiel. First of all, he just got through talking about the days when they came out of Israel. So this would be many years before Isaiah, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Did I say Isaiah? Ezekiel. Isaiah too, but Isaiah came before Ezekiel. He just went back and he spent time with the fathers, which would be 400 or 500 years ago. Spent time talking about him. But did he then come to his current period, which you have to understand Ezekiel was operating at the time after the northern kingdom has already been removed from the land. And now we've got the southern kingdom being approached by Babylon and is about to be captured and conquered and overrun by Babylon, with many, if not, most of Yehuda, which would be the southern kingdom that Ezekiel is speaking to here at this point in time. Most of them will probably die when Babylon comes in during the during the conquering period and the capture of Jerusalem and the lands. Many of them will die, but also many of them were carried out. In the first foray in, and before Jerusalem is sacked, Nebuchadnezzar came and carried out a grouping of people that included Daniel and his companions. And so Daniel was carried off before the sacking of Jerusalem. But Ezekiel and Jeremiah were rather contemporaries, and they existed, and both of them lived before Babylon came in and conquered, during and after Babylon came in and conquered. So both, now Ezekiel, I believe, also spent time in Babylon, amongst the captives. Jeremiah, I believe, really spent some time in Israel during this period of time of the captivity and the conquering of Jerusalem and the sacking. But I think he also spent some time, I'd have to revisit it all, but I think he spent some time in Egypt. We'll see. And maybe some time in Babylon. Jeremiah was all over the place, I think. But they're contemporaries, and it's about the same time. But at this moment that Ezekiel's asking, that Adon is asking his people through Ezekiel, as I live, do not I reign over you? Because if you boil it down, that's the question. As I live, here's the question: do not I reign over you? It's a question to them. And how do they answer that? They would probably say, yeah, sure, you're our Elohim. But they're not operating as though he does, because they're not operating in his Torah. They have gone their own way, as you will see in other scriptures everywhere. They've gone their own way, as the church is doing today. And I don't mean to, I'm not going to go there with this video if I can help it, but the church is going its own way. And it's, there are doctrines of the church that are not in line with the scriptures, and yet the church is following the doctrines that they've been handed from the church, which has them following improper doctrines and things that are not Torah. So the church is worshiping in vain, much like by this time Israel was worshiping in vain. So the question is to Yehuda at that time, do not I reign over you? I think that's a rhetorical question, because they're not acting like it. But here's his promise: I shall bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the lands where you are scattered, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with wrath poured out. Well, this has not necessarily happened. Maybe by the time of this Ezekiel, we have some of the people carried off. Maybe Daniel has already been carried off by this time, and that we would have peoples in the land of Babylon that will be gathered out of the lands of Babylon where they have been scattered. Maybe this is a reference to that, but I think we're going to find that later when we talk about the gathering of the people, that is a much broader gathering from much larger area than Babylon and Assyria. It's the four corners of the earth that they're going to be gathered from. So this seems to me that in response to his rhetorical question here, he basically makes this statement, as he has done, as he started doing even in Deuteronomy with Moses. I mean, as Moses, before they came into the land, and Moses gave his last teaching in the writings of Deuteronomy, where he, presents, here's the Torah. If you follow it, here's how you will be blessed. If you do not follow it, here's how you will be cursed. It will go bad for you. And by the way, we know you're going to not follow it. And so you're going to be judged. The land's going to be judged, and you're going to be scattered. But at the appropriate time, I'm going to call you, and your heart is going to turn, and I'm going to gather you back into the land. So we get this recurrent messaging that we find here and throughout the prophets, beginning actually with Moses talking about it in Deuteronomy. So anyway, I think at the very least, we're talking about a gathering of the people out of Babylon with this passage, but he also very easily could be talking about the larger gathering from the four corners of the world that far exceed Babylon that happens at the end times. And when we get to 35, it reads like this: and I shall bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and shall enter into judgment with you face to face there. So, Alethea's question is, how did he read it? I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on Ezekiel as supporting the idea of second Exodus and being taken into a wilderness as happened in the first Exodus. Well, the wilderness that he's speaking of in the first Exodus is that period of time they spent, that 40 years that they spent in the desert, in the wilderness, outside of the land because of their disobedience. And that was all of the peoples. But now he's talking about, with reference to I think he's got an idea of a second Exodus, and he has a specific meaning for what he's envisioning, I think. So when he's reading this passage, he's seeing this gathering and a wilderness experience before this second gathering, this recovering that we got here in chapter 11, where it says he sets his hand a second time. Is this the passage? He sets his hand a second time to recover the remnant. But going into this wilderness experience, what to do with that? When I hear this, he says, I shall bring you, first of all, both of these at the time of Ezekiel are future tense. I shall bring you out from the peoples. So they have to be amongst the peoples for him to bring them out from the peoples. And then he's also saying, I shall bring you into the wilderness of the peoples. I think this, 35, must precede 34 because he has to take him into the wilderness of the peoples in order to bring them out from the peoples. Because I think this wilderness of the peoples is the same peoples that we're talking about up here. And the peoples would be the nations, where they are scattered amongst the Gentiles, amongst all the lands in the four corners of the earth. So I think it likely that the wilderness of the peoples that they are called out to, that he brings them to, that he scatters them to. He scatters them out of the land and brings them into the lands and the wilderness period, the places of the Gentiles, where he enters into judgment. Well, if this is only referencing how he brought them out of Israel and into Babylon, then you could almost see some judgment there during their time in Babylon. But really, in many respects, they didn't have it too bad in Babylon. As the commands went forth that you are to set up camp there, raise families, build your houses in Babylon. And they did. Not all of them even came back from Babylon because they had it pretty nicely in Babylon, especially after Persia took over. Not that it was perfect, but especially after Persia took over. But if this wilderness of the peoples extends beyond Babylon, because when it's time, they're going to be recovered from the four ends of the earth, well, then the wilderness of the peoples is much larger than Babylon. And in some fashion, he considers that he's in judgment with Israel, with them, the people, face to face. And who is he in judgment with? The elect and the remnant that he's going to gather back together. Is the remnant in judgment right now? Maybe, because even most of the remnant is not walking, assuming that the remnant can get there without Torah, because that's what the church would hold. Hey, we believe in the Messiah. We believe in Jesus. And when it gets to the passage and it says, Lord, Lord, they come to him and they say, Lord, Lord, look what we've done in your name, how we've prophesied and performed many miracles on your behalf. And he says, away from me, you Torahless, because you did not follow Torah. You were without Torah. Away from me, I never knew you. So there's a rejection of people. So there's some question as to whether or not many who think they're of the church, the elect, the chosen, doing it their own way, are actually going to make it at all into the land. There's some question of that. But even if they get past that, are they part of being judged? Is that remnant, those who are getting past, the church, the remnant of Israel, the righteous of Israel, are they in judgment? Is Yahuwah entering into judgment with the remnant amongst the wilderness of the people where they're at? Maybe. I would take it. If I'm going to count myself, and I wish to count myself as the remnant of Israel, a believer, a follower of Messiah, I'm now seeking his Torah and how to do it, and I want to accomplish it. And if I am to be part of that, am I in judgment with him face to face? Well, in some ways, I think I am in judgment with him face to face. And part of that judgment is just separation. I can't get as close to him as I want to. I cannot enter him. I don't have access to him yet. It's coming, but I don't have access to him yet. And neither does the church, even though they think some of these passages and the promises of the second covenant, this renewed covenant applies to them now in this period of time, and that they have entered the Holy of Holies and the veil has been torn, allowing them in this experience in their flesh. They're not, but that's what the church has taught them. And so are we in judgment? I think maybe. But what about the rest of the sands, the rebellious of Israel, that is not even going to be considered part of the remnant, who might become part of a second Exodus when the lands come down and people need to come back, people who missed the first resurrection? Are they under judgment in the wilderness of the peoples now? I think probably. But I will also say, if it's the wilderness of the peoples and the scattering, then we're in a wilderness for a much longer period of time. Israel is in the wilderness for much longer than the 40 years that they spent in the wilderness the first time, in the wilderness outside of Mitzrayim or Egypt. They've been in the wilderness now for some of them 2,400 years, 2,700 years, almost 3,000 years for some of them, and almost 2,000 years for the rest of them, because the last of them were kicked out of the land by Rome in 132 AD. All right, let's finish this out in verse 36. As I entered into judgment with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Mitzrayim, so I enter into judgment with you. So this is the 40-year judgment in the wilderness in the land of Mitzrayim. And so I think this is likely to be a 2,000 to 4,000 year judgment with his people in the wilderness of the peoples before he brings them back from the peoples and into the lands, which, does he say it here? I don't think he says so here. But he said that in Jeremiah. Okay, and so then just to give my thoughts on his third scripture here, I think that Ezekiel supports the idea of a second Exodus, but I don't know that my idea of that second Exodus in this passage is the same idea that Aletheia has for the second Exodus. I think it very definitely supports the regathering of his people. And if that is the second Exodus, okay. And I think it also, it definitely supports the spiritual rapture, the catching away of his people. If I went into, and I will visit here very quickly, because I think Ezekiel definitely, not just in this passage here in chapter 20, but when we get into the passages of 36 and 37, in fact, let me see. Actually, before I do that, I will use this passage, or this comment here that he makes, to go ahead and move into Ezekiel 36 and 37. That also, I think, supports the idea of a catching away type of Exodus. Other things are going to need to support the idea of the natural man second Exodus, I think. I think it will be other passages, and probably not Ezekiel, that is supporting the Exodus of natural man from wherever they're at to back into the land. The gathering of the remnant is one thing, and then a gathering of what's left of natural men that missed that second or that first resurrection, and that Exodus as a second Exodus. I think that must also take place too, but it wasn't necessarily discussed in Ezekiel chapter 20 here. And I think, again, the wilderness, I think we're already in the wilderness. We've been in the wilderness. The dispersion is the wilderness. The scattering amongst the people is the wilderness. But let's move on to his next comment, where he reads, Ezekiel goes on to narrate how life will be experienced by the rejoining of the two sticks, Ephraim and Judah, in the land during the millennial reign, ruled by a Davidic prince in a newly formed Israel. The Davidic prince is, of course, Messiah. And this millennial reign this is commonly referred to as the millennial reign, but it's much more. His reign goes on forever. So it's not a millennial reign. The millennium that we're talking about is the 1,000 years that Satan is bound, and then he's released. But the reign continues to go on into the next whatever period of time. I think it's going to be hundreds of years that will follow that millennial time that Satan is in the pit. But no question that the Davidic prince will be coming down, in my opinion, at the beginning of the day of the Lord. The first thing that happens after the rapture and the catching away of the chosen and elect will be, and after, their period of time up there. The first thing that's going to happen beyond the gathering together of the people will be the judgment of the world, the judgment of the Gentiles and the unbelievers in the world, first through the bowl judgments, and then the coming of Messiah with his Malachim, or his angels, in my opinion, to finish the job with Armageddon. And then from there, after that's over, we have a little period of time, somewhere I've seen 45 days. I'd have to go and work that out. I really don't know, and I don't know how much that matters. But after that, we're going to see how he's going to start to set up, and the rebuilding process that we see described in the old writings begins. But is that rebuilding process really just a bringing down of the New Jerusalem, which is currently up in the heavenlies, on down into its place on earth? And then we see the millennial reign, or what he's calling the millennial reign, which is just the reign of Yahushua, the Davidic prince, in a newly formed Israel in the world, on the land, on the earth. But let's go visit Ezekiel 36. Let me first go back to here. I think we have one of our first references to the idea that we have two separate kingdoms of Israel once they split, but that they will be ending up in unity and gathered together, because we have, and the envy of Ephraim, the northern kingdom, shall turn aside, and the adversaries of Yehuda be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda, and Yehuda not trouble Ephraim. So here is harmony being discussed between the two, which is really, in my mind, it could be symbolic and leaning to how they are combined together. But now let's go visit this in Ezekiel 36. So I hope you'll bear with me and give me a little room here, because I'm actually going to go through Ezekiel 36 and 37, because I think it's so germane to the questions at hand and what he's sharing. If we want to talk about a second Exodus and who will be involved in that second Exodus, and where that second Exodus is leading them to, what is the land that they are being called back into, and who are the components, the partakers of this second recovery, this second Exodus. So let's just read, and let me get my pencil here. Let's go ahead and read 36, and I'll try to keep it as quick as I can. So 36 verse 1, and you, son of man, Nabah, which is prophesied to the mountains of Israel, and you shall say, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of Yahuwah. Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, because the enemy has said of you, Aha, the heights of old have become our possession. Therefore Nabah, and you shall say, Thus said the Adon, the Master Yahuwah, because they laid you waste and swallowed you up on every side, so that you became the possession of the rest of the Gentiles, and you are taken up by the lips of talkers and slandered by the people. Therefore, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Adon, or the Master Yahuwah. Thus said the Adon Yahuwah to the mountains, and to the hills, to the rivers, and to the valleys, and to the deserted ruins, and to the cities that have been forsaken, which became a prey and a mocking to the rest of the Gentiles all around. Therefore thus said the Adon Yahuwah, have I not spoken in my burning jealousy against the rest of the Gentiles, and against all Edom, who gave my land to themselves as a possession, with all joy of heart, with scorn in their being, to drive it out for a prey? Therefore, Nabah, or prophesy concerning the land of Israel, and you shall say to the mountains, and to hills, to rivers, and to valleys, Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, See, I have spoken in my jealousy and my wrath, because you have borne the shame of the Gentiles. Therefore, thus said the Adon, I have lifted my hand in an oath, that the Gentiles that are around you shall bear their own shame. But you, O mountains of Israel, put forth your branches and bear your fruit to my people Israel, for they are about to come. So, when I see this in the mountains of Israel, first of all, we see described up here the mountains and the lands of Israel being overrun by the occupants of Mount Seir and all these Gentile nations who are scorning them because they have fallen. They can't defend themselves. Their Elohim has left them, and they are defenseless and overrun by all the enemies who are just laughing and joking and laying it all to waste and profaning Yahweh through it all. But here's the promise. Well, let me continue to finish that. So this is all of this that is in ruins that are talking up, that he's talking about, because they laid you waste and swallowed you up on every side, so that you became the rest. All of this that we just read, where they become ruins, deserted ruins. I think this is Israel as we know it today, but it is not the Israel that is the land of the New Jerusalem that is in the heavenlies. That one is being prepared for us now and will come down. What we are seeing that they have overrun here, I believe, will be what the lands, when the army that's described in Joel comes washing through the land. Before them is a garden, green, and behind them is burnt. They come in and they completely take between the earthquakes and the other things that happen. All the mountains are leveled, all the valleys are filled up, the waters of the great sea are moved out of the way, and and then they come in and they burn it. We end up with a complete devastation, a complete ruin that ultimately, as I think Revelation referred to, the old earth passed away. That is done. And what is new is coming down. And so everything that we saw just described is the old that will be, it is in ruins and it will stay in ruins. But here when we get to verse 8 and we talk about the mountains of Israel, these mountains of Israel are the future mountains of Israel. I mean, they're their current mountains because they're in the heavenlies right now. But when Israel, first of all, the resurrected, those who participate in the first resurrection, the remnant of Israel, when they come, we are first going up there to the mountains of Israel that are up in the heavenlies. But then I think the mountains of Israel are coming down to the earth, and then we're going to see an exodus or a coming of the survivors of Israel that are out still scattered amongst the people, being gathered during that period of time to these mountains of Israel. So now we have turned our attention to the heavenly mountains of Israel. That will be the land that is promised. This is the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's why they knew that they were waiting for a city not made by human hands. They knew they were waiting on a city that he made. So here is a reference to, I think, the new lands, the mountains of Israel. And he's telling them, put forth your branches, get ready, because here are my people Yisrael, and I believe this will be the first resurrected, gathered up, raptured remnant of Israel that is gathered together, and we head off to the mountains of Israel. Okay, and then in verse 9, for look, I am for you, and I shall turn to you, and you shall be tilled and sown. So these are some references that this land is not all city. When it comes down, we are going to have farmlands. We're going to have forests. We're going to have trees. We're going to have valleys. We're going to have mountains. We're going to have ranches. We're just going to animals, farms. It's just going to be, and it's going to be tilled and sown. There are going to be men working the earth still. And even inside of this mountains of Israel, which I believe is the New Jerusalem. I think the mountains of Israel would be the entirety of the land that comes down. When we get into Ezekiel 40 and we start seeing the description of the city, and when we get to Revelation and we see the description of that city, I know we need to reconcile these things. But spending my time in the old writings, this is the more common reference to the Kodesh mountain, which is probably Mount Zion. But the mountains of Israel are the lands of Israel. When you talk about the Kodesh mountain, that's probably Mount Zion. When we talk about the New Jerusalem, that's probably the city of New Jerusalem. But in Revelation, when we talk about the New Jerusalem coming down, I have a feeling, I suspect that it is relating to the mountains of Israel, which is the entirety of the lands. And I think it's likely that it's the entirety of the lands of Israel, these mountains of Israel, that make up that 12,000 stadia New Jerusalem, because we have a description of the city and the parameters of the city and the temple in Ezekiel that we have to, if scriptures are going to be true, if both Revelation and Ezekiel is true, they're going to have to be reconciled. But let's keep going. And I shall increase men upon you. So what is this, natural men? I agree. I think it will be, I shall increase natural men upon you. So this is, to me, this is the bringing of the natural men. Is that a second Exodus? I think so. As men, once it comes down, first of all, those who participated in the first resurrection are going to come down with it. We're already there, and we're just riding it down, I think. And then it's going to come to the earth. And then natural men are going to make their way there. And that's the increase of men upon you. So we will have the spiritual men, the resurrected men that will be living in certain areas of this, and then we'll have the natural men living in the unwalled villages and other areas of this that are really necessary. If the war scrolls are going to be scripture, which I think they are, then you're going to need something like that to be happening. And we see references that are suggesting it, not just here in this passage of Ezekiel, but throughout the prophets. Okay, and I shall increase men upon you, all the house of Israel, all of it. So when he says this, is now he's going beyond the remnant, and now he's saying also the rebels of Israel, those who did not participate in the first resurrection, that were left here behind. As Esdras would say, it's not good to be left behind. Well, I'm not sure how it was written in Second Esdras, but there's a reference to it that suggests that if you were left behind, then we won't go there. We'll let it go. But is this a reference to the sands, the rest of Israel coming to, that will come in natural bodies at that point in time? I think so. I think it certainly a possibility, if not a probability. And the city shall be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. Well, I don't think that the ruins that we just saw described in the earlier part of chapter 20 are going to be rebuilt in the same way, in the same manner, I think when this reference to rebuilt is really the towns and the cities that come down and are part of, although maybe really the cities actually are built, and maybe that's exactly what this is saying, is that really the men come and begin to build cities after the land comes down. Maybe that's what happens. And, I don't know that I've really thought about it that way before, but in this moment I am kind of thinking, well, maybe that is what we're talking about. So the lands come down, the men come back and increase, and they begin to build their cities and their towns and their houses and their abodes. That is probably what is happening here when we rebuild the land of Israel. The ruins would be under the land. The rebuilding would take place on the new land that would be above it. I would think that's what is easier for me to envision here. Verse 11 here. And I shall increase upon you man and beast, and they shall increase and bear young. And I shall make you inhabited as of old, and do better for you than at your beginnings. So we're going to have man, and natural beast. It's not all going to be spiritual men. It's going to be natural men, in my opinion, as well. And natural men shall increase because they're bearing young. Are the resurrected going to be bearing young? Yahushua tells us we're not going to be marrying or giving in marriage. So are we really, at that point in time, are we going to be having families and bearing the young? Or is it natural men that come to the land that begin to increase and bear young? Well, they continue to die because we know that, those age time, they live for longer periods of time because they're living healthier and other reasons. The benefits of living in the New Jerusalem, but they are bearing the young, and some die. And if they die at 100, that's considered young at 100 years of age. But we know they're dying. And so we have natural men there. But we're talking, it's inhabited as of old, which is old what? The first time they were brought into the land. And this time in the land, it's going to be better than the first time, is basically what we're seeing here. So we have the restored lands, I believe, that came down out of heaven, that they're going to now inhabit, and it's going to be better for them than it ever was. It was a splendid land before, but it's going to really be even that much better now, when at this time, during this reign of Elohim, reign of Yahushua on earth. And continuing here, and you shall know that I am Yahuwah, and I shall let men, my people Yisrael, walk upon you, and let them possess you, and you shall be their inheritance. So here is the natural men coming here, my people Israel, who will be walking around in the New Jerusalem, I think. And the New Jerusalem becomes the people of Israel's inheritance, because even though they missed the first resurrection and would have been counted then as rebels in the sand at that time, they all turn, because as we see elsewhere, Torah goes out, and it is, it goes out, and they respond to it in this time. And we know from Ezekiel here that we are going to have a temple. There is going to be a process of sacrifice for sins, just things going on that all ultimately cause all of the people of Israel to become the remnant. They'll no longer be the remnant because it'll be all of Israel. And the lands, the New Jerusalem, shall be their inheritance. And you will no longer add to their mankind's, natural man's bereavement. Verse 13, thus said the Adon Yahweh, because they say to you, you devour men and have bereaved your nation. Therefore you shall no longer devour men and no longer bereave your nation, declares the Adon Yahweh. And no longer shall I let you hear the insults of the Gentiles, and the reproach of the peoples you shall bear no more, and no longer cause your nations to stumble, declares the Adon Yahweh. And the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own ways and deeds. To me, their way was like the uncleanness of a woman in her monthly period. So this is them going their own ways instead of his ways. And I suggest, as I said earlier, this is what we're experiencing in the church. The church has gone its own ways and are serving him according to his own ways and their own deeds. But to him, that is not according to his instruction. So it's like the uncleanness of a woman in the monthly period. So my objective these days is to find out really how I need to undo what I've understood from my culture and my time and learn what I need to do to not be as the uncleanness of a woman in her monthly period to him any longer. Verse 18, so I poured out my wrath of them for the blood they had shed in the land, and for their idols they defiled it. And I scattered them among the Gentiles. Is that the wilderness of the peoples? And they were dispersed throughout the lands, and I've judged them according to their ways and their deeds. So this is like entering into judgment to them while they are in the wilderness of the peoples. Verse 20, and when they came to the Gentiles, wherever they went, they profaned my Kodesh name, for it was said of them, these are the people of Yahweh, and yet they have gone out of his land. But I had compassion on my Kodesh name, which set apart name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the Gentiles wherever they went. Therefore say to the house of Israel, thus said the Adon Yahweh, I do not do this for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my Kodesh name's sake, which you have profaned among the Gentiles wherever you went. And I shall kadosh my great name, which has been profaned among the Gentiles, which you have profaned in their midst. And the Gentiles shall know that I am Yahuwah, declares the Adon Yahuwah, when I am kadosh in you before their eyes. And I shall take you from among the Gentiles, and I shall gather you out of all lands, and I shall bring you into your own land. So this is, to me, this is the New Jerusalem, and this is the gathering of them the first time out of all the lands in that resurrection moment, but also maybe a gathering the second time once the New Jerusalem comes down and we have the remnant already occupying it, and then the rest of Israel making an exodus to the new land, the New Jerusalem is also. But here's the promise, and I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from your idols I cleanse you. Well, those who are resurrected we will have clean water sprinkled on us. We will be clean from our filthiness. We will no longer sin. Enoch teaches us this. Jeremiah teaches us this. Deuteronomy teaches us this. We will have the circumcision of our heart. We will have the Torah written on our heart. We will be able to walk out Torah in a way we are not able to do while we are bound in this flesh. So I think it likely that these are references to the resurrected, those who participate in that first resurrection. And they continue, and I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, and I shall take the heart of stone of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my ruah within you, and I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim. A constant theme there. But so I think this is likely to be those who participate in the first resurrection, but it could potentially also represent the Israel that we just talked about, that up here in verse 12, where he lets them come into the land and become an inheritance. I don't think that land's going to become their inheritance unless they become believers, become chosen and elect. And so maybe some of these promises down here in verses 25 and 26 and 27 and 28 also belong to natural men, natural Israel as well, not just the remnant that was resurrected and participated in that first resurrection. Okay, in verse 29, and I shall save you from all your uncleanness, and I shall call for the grain and increase it, and I shall bring no scarcity of food upon you. So this is the time of peace. This is the time when Torah is observed in the land, and this is the time where the land has no scarcity upon it. It's just a fruitful, plentiful, wonderful experience and a wonderful place. It is the place of peace. It is where the covenant of peace and the time that we are going to see him reference as the covenant of peace. Jeremiah refers to it as the new covenant or the renewed covenant, a covenant of peace that begins with that second coming and second coming of Messiah and his bringing down of the lands. All right, and verse 30, and I shall increase the fruit of your trees and the increase of your fields, so that you need never bear the reproach of scarcity of food among the Gentiles. And you shall remember your evil ways and deeds that were not good, and you shall loathe yourselves in your own eyes for your wickedness and for your abominations. Who is he talking to here? Is this the natural men that have come into the lands during that period of time and are living as men still that are doing this? Will it be those of us who were resurrected and took part in that first resurrection? Will it be both of us? I really don't know. But somebody called Israel is going to experience this remembering of the deeds and loathe it and hate it. Not for your, verse 32, not for your sake am I acting, declares the Adon Yahuwah. Let it be known to you. Be ashamed and blush for your ways, O house of Yisrael. Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, on the day that I cleanse you from all your wickedness, I shall cause the cities to be inhabited, and the ruined places shall be rebuilt. Again, this is the period of time under the reign of Yahushua in the new land with the resurrected and probably natural Israel. And the land that was laid waste tilled instead of being a ruin before the eyes of all who pass by. And they shall say, this land was laid waste and has become like the Garden of Eden. And the wasted, the deserted, and the destroyed cities are now walled and inhabited. Then the Gentiles which are left all around you shall know that I, and we're left from what? Left from the judgment of Yahweh on the day of Yahweh, because not all the Gentiles are killed. We have the Gentile nations around Israel as well. Then the Gentiles which are left all around you shall know that I, Yahweh, have rebuilt the destroyed places and planted what was laid waste. I, Yahweh, have spoken, and I shall do it. Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, once again I shall let the house of Israel inquire of me to do for them. I shall increase their men like a flock, as a Kodesh flock, as the flock of Jerusalem at her appointed times. So shall the wasted cities be filled with the flocks of men, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. So we're going to have appointed times during that reign of the sovereign, the reign of the Messiah, the reign of Yahushua. During that period of time, we're going to have the appointed times, and we're going to see flocks of men, lots and lots of men. It's going to become heavily populated. Chapter 37, verse 1. The hand of Yahweh was upon me, and took me out by the Ruah, which is the Spirit of Yahweh, and put me down in the midst of the valley, and it was filled with bones. And he made me pass among them all around, and see, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and see, they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, would these bones live? And I said, Oh, Adonai, Yahweh, you know. And he said to me, Nabah, prophesy to these bones, and you shall say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus said the Adon Yahweh to these bones, See, I am bringing into you a spirit, and you shall live. And I shall put sinews on you, and bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put a spirit in you. And you shall live, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. And I nabu, or prophesied as I was commanded, and as I nabu there was a noise, and there was a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked and saw sinews and flesh come upon them, and skin covered them, but there was no spirit in them. And then he said to me, Nabah to the spirit, Nabah, son of man, and you shall say to the spirit, Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, Come from the four winds, O spirit, and breathe on these slain, so that they live. And as I nabu, as he commanded me, and the Spirit came into them, and they lived, and stood upon their feet, a very great army. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. Is that all the remnant and the rebels? I don't know. Maybe. I think it's probably, I really don't know how to do this because, well, here, let's keep reading. Our bones are dry, our expectancy is perished, and we ourselves have been cut off. So would this be the rebels that are experiencing this at this period of time versus the remnant of Israel that was the obedient and the chosen and the elect, the captured, the caught up, and resurrected? Maybe. Then it goes on to read in verse 12, Therefore Nabah, and you shall say to them, Thus said the Adon, See, O my people, I am opening your graves, and shall bring you up from your graves, and shall bring you into the land of Israel. So clearly, this is the people in Sheol at this point in time. This is what is described for us in the Olivet Discourse and in the letters of Paul to the Corinthians and to the Thessalonians, where the dead shall rise first. Well, will the dead that are raised from their graves that are considered Israel include the rebels of Israel? I don't think so. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so. I think it'll be the remnant that is called forth out of the graves. And you shall know that I am Yahweh when I open your graves, O my people, and bring you up from your graves. And I shall put my Ruah in you, and you shall live, and I shall settle you in your own land. And you shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken, and I have done it, declares Yahweh. So I think this is the resurrected that is going to live and shall settle in their own land. And you shall know that I have spoken and I have done it, declares Yahweh. But I do think that the men of Israel, the natural men, will also join them there as well. And so maybe this is what we're talking about up here in verse 11 when we talk about all the house of Israel. Okay, verse 15, And the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, And you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Yehudah and for the children of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Then bring them together for yourself into one stick, and they shall become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, Won't you show us what you mean by these? Say to them, Thus said the Adon, See, I am taking the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom, and the tribes of Israel, his companions. And I shall give them unto him with a stick of Yehudah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. So we have the combining of the two nations into one nation again. And the sticks on which you write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And speak to them, Thus said the Adon Yahweh, See, I am taking the children of Israel from among the Gentiles, wherever they have gone, and shall gather them from all around, and I shall bring them into the land. And I shall make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel that we talked about earlier, which is, I think, the new Jerusalem, the new mountains of Israel. And one sovereign shall be sovereign over them all, and let them no longer be two nations, and let them no longer be divided into two reigns. So this is, when we go back to Alethia's comments here, we are talking about the rejoining of the two sticks, Ephraim and Judah, in the land during the reign of, I'm going to say not the millennial reign, but the reign of Yahushua, the reign of the sovereign. And the sovereign is the Davidic prince. And the entirety of the mountains of Israel, the entirety of this land will be the newly formed Israel. Let me go ahead and see if I can finish this in 37. And I shall make one nation, let them no longer be two nations. Okay, and no longer be divided into two reigns. And they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols, nor their filthiness, nor with any of their transgressions. And I shall save them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned. And I shall cleanse them, and they shall be my people, and I be their Elohim. Okay, more promises of what it's going to be. And here's the identification of who the sovereign is referenced up here. The sovereign that will be over them. It is, while David, my servant, well, we know it's not going to be David. David might be a ruler, because I'm sure he's part of that first resurrection. But we understand that David, my servant, is the Davidic line of, the kingly line of the Davidic line. And that the servant here, though, is the messianic Davidic line, meaning Yahushua. So this, while David, my servant, is Yahushua of the Davidic line. So Yahushua will be, the Messiah will be sovereign over them. And they shall all have one shepherd and walk in my right ruling. So here is the Messiah. We have one king, one ruler over one unified house of Israel that walks in his right rulings and guards his laws throughout the entirety of the land, because they shall all do them. That's not what's being experienced by anybody today. That's only going to be experienced once we have the new kingdom that comes down. And they shall dwell in the land that verse 25, and they shall dwell in the land that I have given Jacob my servant, where your fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell in it, they and their children and their children's children forever, and my servant David will be their prince forever. And I shall make a covenant of peace. Here's the reference to the covenant of peace. This is the new covenant. And this is how they will live there from that time forward. They will be at peace. Now there will come at the end of that 1,000 years, Satan will be released and go and gather up the nations again under the leadership of Gog, and come and make war with them for a season, for a short period of time, and will try to overcome them, but will not conquer them. They will be destroyed when they come against Israel in those days. Okay, so this covenant of peace is the everlasting covenant that is with them. Okay, so let me just read it. And I shall make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant it is with them. And I shall place them and increase them, and shall place my mikdash, which is I believe mikdash is temple. Okay, yeah, I just looked it up. It's his temple, his holy place in their midst forever. So here we have the temple coming into the midst, and he is coming to live, which is also his home. In fact, that's what he says in verse 27, and my dwelling place shall be over them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And the Gentiles shall know that I, Yahweh, am making Israel Kadash, set apart, when my mikdash, my temple, is in their midst forever. I know when we get to Revelation, we have them telling us that there's no need for a temple, and yet here's a reference to his temple in Ezekiel. So we're going to have to harmonize Revelation to the best we can with Ezekiel, because if they're going to both be true, we must find the harmony that pulls these things together. But I want to come back. I want to note this, that his dwelling place will be and his mikdash will be in the midst of them when he comes down, and during this period of time, during this Davidic reign, while he's sovereign, while Messiah is sovereign in the land on earth. Because I believe all of this is the New Jerusalem that we're going to talk about here in a moment. Okay, let's return to my outline. So we just covered this. Let's come down here, because he references Ezekiel chapter 48, clearly delineates the new tribal land allotments that will be established during Yahushua's millennial reign, and it differs from the description of the New Jerusalem, which does not descend, from what I understand, until after Hasatan, which is the Satan, is thrown into the lake of fire after the 1,000-year reign. The 1,000-year rule of our King Yahushua. So just some quick notes here. I don't think, again, just to reiterate, that my opinion is that it's not a 1,000-year rule of our King. It's an eternal rule of our King. It's a 1,000-year period of time that Satan, Hasatan, is in the pit before he is thrown into the lake of fire, because he's thrown into the lake of fire only after he's been released and gone out and deceived the world once again, and brought them all together under Gog to attack the land that is at peace at that point in time, which is the reign of our King Yahushua. So chapter 48 clearly delineates the new tribal land. So let me share. Last year, at some point, I went and tried to break down, because I would like to know, really, how do you reconcile Revelation with Ezekiel? And it's hard to do. Maybe impossible to do. Maybe we don't have enough information yet. And I think that's likely to be the case, or we're just imagining wrong, or our translations things are not right, because they need to be harmonized, and I haven't really found a full way to do it yet. But I broke down Ezekiel 40 when we begin with the descriptions of the temple and the mountains and this last period of time through 48, and just outlined it so that I could make notes on all the measurements and do all the things I need to do. And I actually tried to draw it up. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at a picture. It wasn't very good, and then I spilled coffee on it, so I'm not going to show it to you. It wasn't very good. And then I got to thinking, wait a minute, all this work that I've done, which I went ahead and finished, all this work that I've done, really others have already done, and there are representations that I could pull down, in PDF form and other documents that they've created to do the same thing I was trying to do, and most of them were fitting pretty much what I was coming up with as well. I will say that we have a division of the land in chapter 45 that he's referencing here when he says, clearly delineates the new tribal land allotments. Well, that starts taking place in chapter 45 here, and you go through it and you begin to see. Well, let me just kind of show you without going in, because that's not what this video is all about, although it could take over. I'm going to let it go though. But let me show you a couple things, because when we get there, when he talks about the tribal allotments of the land, there is a separated out area that has all of these dimensions, and this is roughly a rough representation of the dimensions. And you would have the tribe of Dan on the top layer to the north, somewhere, say, up in this area. Because I think it's all centered around, if this is the Jerusalem area, I think that the temple is going to, in Mount Zion, I think this is where the temple is going to be reconciled. So you would take what we're seeing over here, this city and these allotments of land, and you would move them over here, maybe something like this in the lands, and then we would see Dan up here and Asher here. So we would take this and we would move it over, and this city here that it's referencing and the temple here. So here's the city on this side in the portion allotted to the prince, in this drawing anyway, and then here is the temple that is allotted to the priest, and here's the point, an allotment to Levi in the midst of the princely division. So this middle section is the allotment given to the Messiah, the prince, and he comes in from the east gate, which I believe is this side, and enters the temple from this side. And I mean, that's another whole thing as well. And then we have the allotments for the rest of the tribes, and all of this would exist in this type of area here. And I don't think that any of this can become large enough or anywhere near. In fact, I think it probably, let me see if I can draw what is more likely, and I'd have to spend more time to really get down. I think the allotment is more likely to be something like this in the midst of this land. And then outside here would be all the mountains of Israel, because all of this would be within the larger confines of what comes down and the mountains of Israel, and where I believe that many of the natural, I think it likely that the resurrected people are going to be living inside of this area here. That's what I think. And I don't think natural men will be allowed in. But in the outskirts of this, all around, will be the unwalled villages and the lands and the farms and the things that are taking place out here, where men are walking upon the lands, and that will become their possession and their inheritance. Well, I think this is where natural men is going to be located in what we're going to see happen in the end time. So this is a representation of what he's referring to here when he talks about the new tribal land allotments established during the millennial reign, which again is not the millennial reign, but the New Jerusalem and the beginning of the reign of Yahushua, which is actually eternal. And it differs from the description of the New Jerusalem, which he says does not descend from what he understands until after Hasatan is thrown into the lake of fire. Well, I think it's likely that he thinks that for a variety of reasons. And I sometimes when we get into the descriptions that we find in the old writings, and when we get into natural men and the rebuilding and certain things, it would lead you to, especially since the description that we see in Revelation does differ from what we see in Ezekiel, it might lead one to think that that land that is described in Revelation does only come down after this period of time. But I don't think it can really be that way, because I really think that that is the abode that is in the heavenlies. That is what is made for us, and that is what's coming down. And when he makes his home, his home's there. I don't think he's going to come in here and rebuild something here. I think his home is coming down just like our homes are coming down, because he's going to make his dwelling place amongst us on the earth down here. And the Mikdash that is up there, the real temple, is coming down to earth. That's up there right now is coming down to earth. And it's going to come down during this period of time. So I think that all of the components of the promised land that is promised and shall be coming down, the land to which all of Israel is called back into, must be here during this, from really the beginning of the day of Yahweh and his reign onward, which includes the millennial period that Satan is in the pit, and the period after he's released, and the gathering together of the armies of Gog and Magog. So let me show a couple quick things. That kind of leads me to, and this, I know it's going to make this a longer video than what I would want to, but let me go to Revelation 19 because I think it's worth doing here. Let me just go here and I'll try to read it as quickly as I can so we can get some of what we're talking about, because it is germane to what this discussion is all about. Because when we get to 19, let me just read it. 19 verse 1. And after this, let me get my pencil. And after this, I heard a loud voice of a great crowd in the Shemaim, or the heavens, saying, Hallelujah, deliverance and esteem and respect and power to Yahweh our Elohim, because true and righteous are his judgments, because he has judged the great whore who corrupted the earth with her whoring. Who's the whore? It's that whore that sits on the beast. She is Babylon, and Babylon has come and gone in the natural, but Babylon is also, I think, the worldly system. It is the foundational worldly system through which Hasatan does operate now. And he has avenged her on her the blood of his servants shed by her. And a second time they said, Hallelujah, and her smoke rises up forever and ever. So that's more judgment of Babylon. And the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures fell down and worshipped Elohim, who sat on the throne, saying, Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. And a voice came from the throne saying, Praise our Elohim, all you servants and all those who revere him, both great and small, or small and great, And I heard as the voice of a great crowd, and as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of mighty thunder, saying, Hallelujah, for Yahweh El Shaddai reigns. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him praise, for the marriage supper of the Lamb has come, and his wife has prepared herself. Well, there's some question about who the wife is, because the Lamb is getting ready to be married to his bride, and there's going to be a marriage. And then there's a reference to, I know most of us think in church doctrines anyway, that his wife is the church. And I don't know that that's true, the church. They would say the church, but I think if you're going to say it's the church is the elect and the chosen, then it would be Israel. It would be the remnant of Israel. That would be the wife in that connotation. But later we're going to see that the new Jerusalem is considered, is going to be adorned as his wife, and is going to be considered his wife that has prepared herself for him up in the heavenlies. And to her it was given to be dressed in fine linen, clean and bright. For the fine linen is the righteousness of the Kodeshim, which are the set apart ones, the holy ones, the righteous, those who are set apart in righteousness. Well, we could think of that being the Kodeshim, being the righteous ones, the resurrected, the church, whatever you want to call us. You could think of that, and us being his wife. But it also is possible that if the her in this is the new Jerusalem, that really she is dressed in the righteousness of the fine linen that is the righteousness of the Kodeshim. So it is the fine linen that is the righteousness of the Kodeshim is what is the fine linen on her. But all of that is speculation. I can't know that. I think it makes sense, but I really don't know what to do with it. And he said to me in verse 9, Write, Baruch, or blessed are those who have been called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. So this is, to me, this is the resurrected. This are those of us who participate in that first resurrection. And we are not the bride to follow this conversation we had up here. We wouldn't necessarily be the bride, but would be those who were called to participate with the marriage supper of the Lamb. That is the marriage between the Lamb and the New Jerusalem. And he said to me, These are the true words of Elohim. Again, I do not know. I am speculating, but that's all of us are doing. Because we can't know. It's not given to us explicitly. It's inferred to us. So let's keep going. And he said to me, These are the true words of Elohim. And verse 10, I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, See, do not. I am your fellow servant, and of your brothers who possess the witness of Yahushua. Worship Yahweh, for the witness of Yahushua is the spirit of Nebuah, which is prophecy. And I saw the Shemaim, or the heavens, open, and there was a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Trustworthy and True, and in righteousness he judges and fights. Well, who does he fight? Here, we just had the marriage supper of the Lamb. If you go back, if I said it earlier in this video, and I think I did, I think that when we are raptured, we are caught up together with him in the sky and then taken up to the New Year's Jubileum, where we first have the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then once that's over, we are called. He says, go, my children, into your rooms, into your abodes, and wait a little while until I am finished, until the displeasure is past. Because after the marriage supper of the Lamb, then I think this is what we're experiencing after that marriage supper of the Lamb. He mounts up on his white horse, and his Malachim, his angels, mount up with him, and they head on down to earth where they have to finish the judgment. And he who sat on him was called Trustworthy and True, and in righteousness he judges and fights. His fight is not over yet. Even though the wedding supper of the Lamb just happened, his fight is not over. So he heads on back down to earth, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, having a name that has been written, which no one had perceived except himself, and having been dressed in a robe dipped in blood. This is not the only reference to his robe being dipped in blood. We get this in either Zechariah or Zephaniah or both. And I think we see a reference to him being, his robe being dipped in blood in Isaiah as well. And his name is called the Word of Yahweh. So we know this is Messiah. And the armies in the Shemaim dressed in fine linen, because it's dressed in fine linen, and we think of that as the resurrected, we think this is the resurrected folks who are going to be coming back with him, but I don't believe so. When you read the army of Joel, it looks much more like an angelic or an army of the Malachim that come down and with him, dressed in linen, white and clean, riding on white horses alongside of him. And this is the army of Joel. And out of his mouth, which is the sovereign Messiah, goes forth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, all the Gentiles, and he shall shepherd them with a rod of iron. Whoever lives through it shall be shepherded by him with a rod of iron, with strong leadership. And he treads the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of El Shaddai. This is the day of Yahweh against the nations, against the Gentiles, against the unbelievers. This is dealing with them at the end of time as they are being led by the beast and his prophet, etc. And on his robe and on his banner, he has a name written, Sovereign of Sovereigns and Adon of Masters, Master of Masters. Verse 17, and I saw one messenger standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the mid-Shemaim, come and gather together for the supper of the great Elohim, to eat the flesh of sovereigns and the flesh of commanders, the flesh of the strong ones, and the flesh of horses and those who sit on them, and the flesh of people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast. So this is the battle of Armageddon and all the wars that take place. This is the the result of the war between Yahushua and his angels against the beast and his prophet and his armies, which was a massacre. It was just a massacre, and now it's time for the birds to come and feed upon those that have been massacred. And then we see in verse 19, I saw the beast and the sovereigns of the earth and their armies gathered together to fight. I guess I got a little bit ahead, because here is the angels called together all of the birds in anticipation of this, because here's the description of the beast and the sovereigns of the earth and all their armies being gathered together to fight him who sat on the horse and his army. And this is when the massacre takes place, and then the birds begin to eat. And at the end of it all, the beast was seized, and with him his false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he led astray those who received the mark of the beast and who worshipped his image. The two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, burning with sulfur, and the rest were killed with a sword, the massacre that came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. Well, I don't believe that the sword, that there's a literal, there might be, but I don't think there's a literal sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. I think it's figurative, because I think the entirety of this, I think it's likely that Messiah killed his share of men, but I think the Malachim also killed men, and they weren't all killed by a sword that literally came out of his mouth. They were killed basically by by his coming. And I think it's important to note that, because we're going to get into another passage where we talk about the fire coming out of his mouth at the end of times, which is not this battle. It's another battle reserved for a future time that is not the beast in the Antichrist wars of battle, this battle of Armageddon described right here. There's a future time that it's going to happen again, and we see the fire come out of his mouth to destroy the armies that are gathered against him. So let me move on to chapter 20, verse 1. And I saw a messenger coming down from the Shemaim, or heaven, having a key to the pit, having the key to the pit of the deep and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. This is the 1,000 years that we're talking about. And he threw him into the pit of the deep and shut him up and put a seal on him, so that he should lead the nations no more astray until the 1,000 years were ended. And after that, he has to be released for a little while. Okay. And then we move on from this theme to another theme. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them. And they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahushua, and because of the word of Yahweh, and who did not worship the beast nor his image, and did not receive his mark upon their foreheads or upon their hands. And they lived and reigned with Mashiach for 1,000 years. So this might also be why we are calling it a 1,000-year reign. Now, it is possible that I'm pretty confident that Mashiach is going to continue to reign forever. Maybe it's just 1,000 years that we are reigning together with him. Maybe, because I don't think it's Mashiach's reign that ends after 1,000 years. And if this is referencing the end of something, I think it might be the combined reign of they that lived with Mashiach. Because after the 1,000 years, and I don't think that immediately it comes to an end, because once we're going to see once Satan is released again, will they be needed? The resurrected be needed to live and reign amongst natural men at that point in time? Well, I think it does continue until the Gog-Magog war at least. So I'm not really sure what to do with this. I'll respect everybody. If we want to call it a millennial reign, I'm good with it. But what I will say is I doubt very seriously. In fact, I'm really confident that Mashiach's reign certainly does not end with 1,000 years. It goes on forever. Whether or not the rest of us reign only 1,000 years, making it a millennial reign, a combined reign, okay, maybe. I'm not going to argue with anybody on it, and we're just talking about opinions here anyway, and what we are seeing, what I'm seeing in Scripture, and juxtaposed against what others may see in Scriptures. And let's go on to verse 5. And the rest of the dead did not come to high, which is life, and I think that's eternal life, until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Maybe that's not eternal life. Maybe high is just life, because I think that when the rest of the dead come to life, it isn't unto eternal life. They are risen to be judged. I think that's what's going to happen. But this up here where they are risen is the first resurrection. It's the second resurrection that happens after the 1,000 years. So the first resurrection before the 1,000 years, and the second resurrection sometime after the 1,000 years were ended. Barak and Kodesh is the one having part in the first resurrection, to take part in that rapture, that first reckoning. To them, the second death possesses no authority over these, but they shall be Kohanim of Yahweh and Mashiach, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Here's another reference to that millennial reign, which makes sense why Aletheia would be referencing this. And I guess in the moment that I was commenting to him, I wasn't remembering the wording here like this, but maybe this returns us to a millennial reign, and the reason to call it a millennial reign. But again, I don't think Messiah's will end with 1,000 years, and I really don't know that their reign also ends. I don't really know what to do with 1,000 years. Maybe it's at least 1,000 years. Maybe it's referencing a period of time here that don't really know. We'll just have to live it and see. Let me show you something I want to, because I may go visit this I may do a video on this, and let me see if I can get to my Yah scriptures here in verse 32, because here's a reference to the same type of thing. We're in the descriptions of what's going on in Isaiah. And in verse 32, or chapter 32, verse 1, it says, "See, a sovereign shall reign in righteousness." Let me get my pencil. A sovereign shall reign in righteousness. There's the Davidic line. There it is. Messiah, him reigning in righteousness, and rulers rule in right ruling. Is this not the resurrection that we're talking about? Let's go ahead and call it the millennial reign, that 1,000-year reign where the resurrected shall rule and reign alongside of him during that, at least that 1,000 years, if not longer. And each one of these rulers shall be as a hiding place from the wind, a shelter from the downpour, as rivers of water in a dry place, as a shadow of a great rock in a weary land. So it isn't just the sovereign that's going to be all of these great things, including being a shadow of a great rock in a dry and weary land. All of the rulers will be. And who will they be ruling to? Will they be ruling? I think will be ruling amongst Israel for sure, in the land, in the mountains of Israel. But will our rule then, if assuming I am a part of it, and I sure want to be, will our rule then extend to the lands of the Gentiles out and around? I really don't know. But to whom are we being as a hiding place from the wind and a shelter from the downpour, as rivers of water in a dry place, and as a shadow of a great rock in a dry and weary land? I think in the lands, in the mountains of Israel, they won't really have much wind and downpours and dry places, and they won't be a weary land. So it almost seems like it must be relating to then the lands outside the Gentile lands. Maybe, not sure. Okay, let's return to Revelation in verse 7 of chapter 20 here. "And when the 1,000 years have ended, Satan shall be released from his prison." So that's what I was saying. And I guess I feel corrected here that this is the 1,000 years that Satan is bound. But there are references to the reign only lasting 1,000 years too. So it's the millennial reign. But in verse 8, "He shall go. Satan is loosed from his prison, and he shall go out to the nations, out to lead the nations astray, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog." Magog is a land. Gog is the leader. "And to gather them together for battle, whose number is as the sands of the sea." So throughout that 1,000-year period and a little further, they also grew into great numbers out where they were. And once Satan is released, he is released to go and deceive once again. And he does successfully. And then he brings Gog and Magog together up against all over the breadth of the earth, and then surrounds the camp of the Kodeshim, which are the set apart ones, which would be Israel, and the beloved city, which is the New Jerusalem. And a fire came down from Elohim out of the Shemaim and consumed them. So this would be, I think, and I mentioned this earlier, this fire coming down from Elohim out of the Shemaim. I've been envisioning that most of my life as a literal fire coming down. Just wipe them out. It's all over. It's done. One quick movement. But then I began to read the War Scrolls. And let me just say, the War Scrolls, I believe they're scripture, and never, I hope I'm not repeating myself in this video, but never before have we seen Israel grow to become something that can be the armies and the garrisons that are formed and dressed in the way that they are dressed at the time of the War Scroll. And in the War Scroll, we see Gog mentioned. So I think that the War Scroll is really describing this very end-time battle. This is not the same battle of the Antichrist, the beast and the prophet and Armageddon. This is another war altogether. And in the War Scrolls, we see the birds being called together once again for the slaughter. And in the War Scrolls, we see that war lasts 22 years or something like that. I'd have to pull it all back out and look at it again. But it's not like 7 years, or even a short period of time. It is an extended battle across time, if I'm reading the War Scrolls correctly. And so even though we see a fire coming down from Elohim out of the Shemaim and consuming them, I think the reality of it, if the War Scrolls hold any meaning, is that it's a literal on the earth battle, just like the Battle of Armageddon will be. And just like they reference the sword of the tongue of Yahushua being what kills the armies of the Antichrist, well, now this is a reference to fire of Elohim coming out of the Shemaim to consume them. But either way, I think it will be literal killing of the people, of the armies that come to battle them. Verse 10, and the devil who led them astray was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet are, and they shall be tortured day and night forever. And I saw a great white throne and him who was sitting on it, from whose face the earth and the Shemaim fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is high. And the dead were judged from what was written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and the grave gave up the dead who were in it, and they were judged, each one according to his works. And the death and the grave were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So this is the second judgment. Everybody is raised to life in that second resurrection, and then they are judged. And if they are not counted worthy of life, if their name is not written in the book of life, they are thrown into the lake of fire along with death and along with the grave, because at the end of this period, we no longer have flesh. We no longer have a body that can die. Death is over. The need for a grave, a holding place for the spirits of those who are in waiting for the resurrection, is over. All of that's done, and we enter a new time, maybe an eighth day or something of that nature. Well, and just so maybe I got a little carried away again. And if anyone was not found written in the book of high, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So this is what I was just describing. And then we get to chapter 21. And I saw and are we on to a new theme? I think so. And I saw a renewed Shemaim and a renewed earth. For the former Shemaim and the former earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. So I do not know what this means, but let me offer something to you. As I've been describing, he's describing a new Shemaim and a renewed earth. So the land coming down, the mountains of Israel coming down and setting down here. And we're going to have new heavens, a new, the remaking of the sky, because when the day of the Lord comes, when the day of Yahweh comes, the stars fall from the sky. So we're going to have probably a remaking of what are the components of the heavenlies above us. But then we also have the earth that is coming down from the New Jerusalem. And maybe it's referring to all of the earth, but maybe it's just referring to the earth in that realm that we're getting ready to describe here of this 12,000 stadia, which is the land, the mountains of Israel coming down, etc. Because under that, the sea, I believe the mountains of Israel and in that area have been leveled. The valleys have been filled with, mountain material, and the sea has been filled up. And so here we are saying, for the former Shemaim, the stars fell from the heaven, and the sun was darkened, and the moon turned to blood. And so all of that needs to be remade. Whatever the sky is going to be above us need to be remade. And the former earth had passed away. So all of the land of Israel is gone. It's passed away. And the sea that was outside of it, the Mediterranean Sea, is outside of it. It is no more, because it is now the foundation for what? The Kodesh city, renewed Jerusalem, coming down out of the Shemaim from Elohim, prepared as a bride. Here's the reference to her as a bride, one of them, coming down out of the Shemaim as a bride adorned for her husband. So here is this reference of this land coming down that maybe should more be called the Kodesh Mountains, the entirety of what he's prepared up there, which includes a city, but it also includes all of the outlying areas, which are mountains, hills, rivers, farms, all, land, etc. And it is coming down from the Shemaim. Let's keep reading in verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from the Shemaim saying, see, the booth of Elohim is with men. So here's the dwelling place that we have read in Ezekiel, where he has come. So here it is. In answering the question or making a statement and an opinion of when this new city is going to come, it comes at the beginning of the reign of Messiah, the reign of our sovereign, the reign of Yahushua, because the booth of Elohim has come to men at that time. That's what Ezekiel tells us at that time, at the beginning of his reign. So here we have the coming down of the Kodesh city, and it's at that time that we're hearing a voice saying, the booth of Elohim is with men, and he shall dwell with them. Just like we saw in Ezekiel, my dwelling place shall be over them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And the Gentiles shall know that I, Yahweh, am making Yisrael Kodash, when my Mikdash is in their midst forever. So my temple and my home is coming down to them. And I think it's at the beginning of that 1,000-year period of time. And they shall be my people, and Elohim himself shall be with them and be their Elohim. So there we have, is that not Ezekiel? My dwelling place shall be over them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Let's reread this here. See, the booth of Elohim is with men, and he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and Elohim himself shall be with them and be their Elohim. And Elohim shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor mourning, nor crying, and there shall be no more pain, for the former have passed away. Now, this is interesting to me because only the resurrected shall have no more death, because those of the natural body that come into the land will experience death. So, and maybe they'll even be capable of experiencing tears. The resurrected will have no need for tear. We will have no need for anything, none of this mourning, no crying, because we're not experiencing these things anymore. But out and about in the nations, Gentile nations out and around, there shall be death and mourning and crying. And I think even in Israel, I think there's death. We have references to them dying. So I think we might be moving away from this period of time, this 1,000 years plus time, up until the time when the second resurrection happens, and the judgment happens, upon which time then we have no more flesh to die, to mourn, or cry. And at that point in time, all of the former pain is past. All the former things have passed away, and there is no more pain. So I think it possible, if not probable, that in this verse here, we moved past the second judgment and the second resurrection. Verse 5, and he who was sitting on the throne said, see, I make all new. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and trustworthy. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Aleph and the Tau, the beginning and the end. To the one who thirsts I shall give the fountain of water of high without payment. The one who overcomes shall inherit all this, and I shall be his Elohim, and he shall be my son. So when you read all this, it could be that all the land and all of that, and I think that's how I read it, and that's how I just read it. But if it was just him being our Elohim and us being his son, that would be enough to inherit. But as for the cowardly and the untrustworthy and the abominable and the murderers and those who whore and the drug sorcerers and the idolaters and all the false, their part is in the lake of fire which burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So I think this is all also maybe belonging to this, because once it has all passed away and there is no more death, no more pain, no more mourning, no more crying, which is after the second resurrection, then it literally is done. He is the Aleph and the Tau, the beginning and the end. And that's it. That's it. And then all things are new. Not just some things, all things will be made new, and we will enter what I've heard referenced elsewhere as an eighth day, from the time that we don't have in Scripture forward into eternity that is yet to be written for us, at least to my knowledge, has yet to be written for us. But then we move on to another thought in verse 9. And one of the seven messengers who held the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues came to me and spoke, saying, come, I shall show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. So here's another reference to the bride, the Lamb's wife, here in Revelation. And he carried me away in the Ruah, which is the Spirit, to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the Kodesh, Jerusalem, descending out of the Shemaim from Elohim. So is this great city the bride of the Lamb? That's what this passage seems to be suggesting. And the bride of the Lamb is adorned in fine linen, and that fine linen is the righteousness of the Kodeshim, according to the earlier passage. And it's the same city, it's the great city, the Kodesh Jerusalem, descending out of the Shemaim from the Elohim. So we are going back up to this period of time where John saw the Kodesh city, the renewed Jerusalem, coming down out of the Shemaim from Elohim. Same event here. Having the esteem of Elohim, and her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone. Then he goes on to describe many things, including the 12 gates. And this is where Aletheia will say that this is just a different description of what we see in Ezekiel, and I agree. there's a great city coming down, and then we talk about the stones and, the makeup and the gates, at just the description of the gates and other things that are described here. But let me get back here, because here it says, and the city lies foursquared. Is it the city that lies foursquared, or is it the mountains of Israel and the land that lies foursquared? I really don't know, because if it's going to be city, literally the city, this is too big for the city described in Ezekiel, which is one of the things I think Aletheia is pointing out, and the things that I have tried to test. The city is going to be foursquare in length, and when measured, it's 12,000 stadium, the length and the breadth and the width. So it's, what is that? What did we decide that was? 1,300 miles, 1,367 miles in length on each side and in height. Maybe. And he measured its wall 140 amah, according to the measure of man, and that is a messenger. And the structure of his wall was jasper. So because of the way this is worded, this is suggesting that the wall is all around this 12,000 stadian land that is coming down, that he's referenced here as a city, because it says city, and maybe that is misleading, though, to us. I mean, literally it could be that this wall is around that 12,000 stadian, or 1,367 some miles, all the way around it. But it could also be that we have moved from the mountains of Israel here, and the entirety of the land, the measurement of the land, and moved into measuring the city that is contained and somewhat described for us in Ezekiel. And then maybe that's what gets measured. Maybe. I don't know, but we start seeing more descriptions of the walls, and the city was clean, gold like clear glass. So is the entirety of this to be one big city? What we would picture as a city. That's how it's always conjured to my mind and to my imagination. But I think we have enough in the old writings to suggest that the city it's referencing up here, and the 12,000 stadion, is the entirety of the land, the entirety of the mountains of Israel, but not the city itself. The city is something else. I think it's likely. And the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones, the first, etc. I'm not going to keep reading all these. It's wonderful, but I'm not going to keep reading it. And I saw no Mishkan in it. So there's no Mishkan in the city, for El Shaddai is its Mishkan and the Lamb. But we know in Ezekiel there is a Mishkan. We know in the heavenlies now there is a Mishkan. So we will have to find a way to reconcile this. And I'm not sure how to do that. I don't have the answers. Hopefully somebody does. Because if this suggests that in the city there's no Mishkan, but we get back to this description here, and we have the temple right here, and this being the city right here, maybe, because really maybe this is the city. If we can get into this, if I were making this, if this is the land that comes down, the 12,000 stadian land that comes down, but the city itself that he's describing with walls and the adornment is really something more like this. This would be more like the Ezekiel described city. And then inside of this city would make sense, because there's no, and maybe this city is where we, as the Kadeshim, those who were resurrected, the remnant of Israel, maybe this is where we're living, and the city in which nothing unclean is going to go. Maybe this entirety of this area, actually I don't think it could be the entirety of this area. I think it might be the city itself, that only the resurrected bodies and our Messiah will go. And here is the description of the walls they're talking about, and etc. Because this is contained now within a larger body that's come down. And the temple is up here, and the temple then would not be in the city. And the city itself is maybe what needs no sun. So maybe we've gone to take this illustration. If you can grasp this picture, let me see if I can make it a little bigger. Okay, so here is the entirety of the lands and the allotment of the tribes. But here is the allotment of the Prince, the Messiah. And inside of it is this area. First we have the temple up here, which we know is up on a high mountain, Mount Zion probably. And the allotment to the Levitical priests, and the temple here. And this is the city. This is the city. So maybe this is, when he says, I see the city coming down, he's talking about the land, the mountains of Israel coming down. And then he begins to describe this city within the allotments of Israel when we are talking about this description of the city in here. So it's the city, it's the mountains of Israel that is four-cornered in size. And again, the mountains of Israel, the land of Israel, being 12 stadia in length and breadth and height. But then he moves on to the city, and maybe because I don't think there's going to be a wall around all of this. There might be. Maybe there is literally a wall around all of it. I don't know, but it seems unlikely, even though possible. But if that was possible, how does Gog and his armies come into the unwalled villages that we see described in Ezekiel? More problems that would have to be reconciled with Ezekiel. But if we are really talking about this city now, and the walls of the city, if we moved off into the city as described in the descriptions of Ezekiel, then we might be talking about the walls being 144 amah wide, which is a wide wall according to the measure of man, and the structure of its wall, and then the contents and the foundations of the wall of the city. Now, are we talking about that internal city that I just spoke of? I don't know. But then it also makes sense if there's no Mishkan in it, for El Shaddai is its Mishkan. In this spot here, maybe there's no reason for a Mishkan because the Mishkan is up here. But his dwelling place is here with us amongst men. And because this is his dwelling place, we have no need for the sun and stars, etc. here that we're going to read about here. And the city had no need of the sun. Again, is this that small city I was just pointing and circling? Had no need of the sun nor the moon to shine in it, for the esteem of Elohim enlightened it, and the Lamb is its lamp. And the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the sovereigns of the earth shall bring their esteem into it. Who would the sovereigns of the earth be? Would this be the Gentiles? I think so. And its gates shall not be shut at all by day, for night shall not be there, and they shall bring the esteem and the appreciation of the nations into it. So we know from descriptions in the old writings over and over again that the Gentile nations are commanded to come and come to the land of Israel once a year. And if they don't come, then rain is withheld from where they're at. They are commanded to come during this period of time. And so this is a description of them bringing their esteem and appreciation into the city. And there shall by no means enter into it whatever is unclean, neither anyone doing abomination and falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So going back to this and using this reference, which is not the only reference, we get references like this in the old writings. But I think that it would be incorrect to say that nobody can come into this land because, first of all, we have natural men that are going to be serving as priests, and so they will be serving in the temple. And I think we're going to see natural men come into the lands. They're going to have to get their gifts into this area. They've got to enter the area of into the area of the mountains of Israel. But when we're talking about this city right here, nothing but the redeemed and the nothing but those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life shall enter this city right here, because this is reserved for the Kodeshim. I think maybe that seems like a reasonable explanation to try and harmonize. And I'll just say here in verse 22, he showed me a river of water of high, clear as crystal, coming out of the throne of Yahuwah and of the Lamb in the midst. Goes on to describe it, but we have a description of this river as well in Ezekiel. And so, returning to my outline, I think I'm giving my opinion. I think I've done it all along, and I'll just quickly say here, reading it again, yep, I think the tribal land allotments are described to us in Ezekiel, and here we have them. Let me get this smaller again. Here we have them. And I think that's what will exist during Yahushua's, and I'm going to go ahead and stay with, I guess I will quit saying what I was saying, and we'll stay with the millennial reign. And it differs from the description of the New Jerusalem, which does not descend. I think it does if we're going to treat the entirety of the 12,000 stadion as the literal new city itself, then it would not meet. But it might if we take the New Jerusalem and understand the New Jerusalem to be all of the mountains of Israel, the entirety of the land of Israel, and that the city itself is a component inside of this larger land mass. And then you maybe can harmonize what we see between Ezekiel and Revelation. I think maybe. But I don't agree that it descends after Satan is thrown into the lake of fire. I believe it descends when he makes his abode, which is the beginning of the 1,000-year period, or the beginning of his reign on earth. All right. I think that will do. Let me finish this up, and I know this is waxed long, as mine tend to anyway, but let me just, when I embrace all of this, and I think about this, because I think about this a lot, for me, Aletheia touched upon some things that I have struggled to find in scriptures, my answers to, because I have to ask this question: who is Israel? Because we know that there's the natural seed of Jacob and Israel that becomes as the sand. But in the midst of all of Israel are the remnant, the obedient, and the rebels or disobedient. So here we have born to Jacob or Israel, the natural seed, the blood lineage, but the rebels, the disobedient, the unbelievers, those who were rebellious, who we would call fleshly Israel, were the vast majority of all of those born to Israel that were the natural seed. Only a remnant was obedient, and what you would be called believers, those who were obedient, and who Paul would refer to and we would refer to as spiritual Israel. And then we have to decide what is the land, or I ponder this because, and we touched upon it, because we have Israel as it currently exists and has been destroyed, although now we have it being rebuilt, but not, I don't think in the way that it's going to be. I think what we're going to see is another devastation of the land of Israel, probably. During this time of the Antichrist. I think we're going to see Israel destroyed again. That's likely. And then what is replaced, though, when we start talking about the land that they are called back to? Well, I think what we understand as Israel today is not the land they're called back to. I think it's going to be destroyed. And I think destroyed and replaced with what's in heaven now. And the rebuilding process will take place on what's in heaven and will be brought to earth when Yahushua comes back to earth, or comes back to earth to live with us and tabernacle among us. So the New Jerusalem and Mount Zion, I believe, is what's up in the heavenlies now that he has gone off to prepare. The destroyed land as it sits currently, which is current Israel, and then it is rebuilt for natural Israel later, I believe will be rebuilt on the land that comes down from the heavenlies. And who is called and brought back to the land? Well, first we have the remnant that we see discussed in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. The believers, there is no question about them coming back. No question. We know what to do with them because they're the ones that are going to participate in that resurrection. And will be gone from the earth by then. So then what about the sand? What about the ones that were rebels that did not die during the judgment of Yahweh on earth? What about them? Because they're out there. Does this have something to do with the 144,000 who are special people that you wonder why they weren't included in the first resurrection? And I do not know the answer to that. But it seems that they remain men of earth, and they probably become the leaders amongst natural Israel and along with us, amongst the lands of Israel and the mountains of Israel, I think. But we have to figure out what to do with the non-believers. And who are, the disobedient Israel that we would call the rebels? What do we do with them? Because are they called back into the land? Are they to be resurrected? In fact, here's where I was headed into that. What about these rebels and the dead ones? Because it's one thing when they're living at the end of time and they are living out amongst the Gentiles, are not killed during the judgment day. And then they become part of an exodus back into the land. Well, we kind of know what to do with them too, or at least it seems more obvious what to do with them. But then we have the dead that died during the judgment of Yahweh, but also the dead that have died throughout history and are considered the rebellious and the unrighteous. Are they going to rise and participate in that first resurrection? I don't think so. Are they going to rise and participate in the land and rise up and be given bodies again that will be natural and men and live in the land again? Maybe, because there are references to all of Israel. Maybe. And I don't know what to do with that, but I don't think so. I really don't think so. So I think it likely that the dead are going to be, they've disqualified themselves for being counted amongst Israel. They were born into it. I've heard a teaching on it and I embrace it, that Israel is born into the covenant and it's theirs to lose through disobedience. They're born into the covenant and then they lose it through disobedience. For Gentiles, we are born outside the covenant, and it's for us, it's available now to us to grasp. It's always been available to us to grasp. Even though we're not of the bloodlines, we could grasp and come in and join and be grafted into the olive tree of Israel. Always been able to do that. And now it's happened in rampant numbers since Yahushua's first visit here on earth. Okay, so let me see if I can recover my thoughts here. So really, I'm still trying to figure out what to do with, not the remnant, because I know what to do with them, but I am trying to decide what to do with the non-believers, all of Israel, the dead ones that are in Sheol now, and the living at the time of his coming back, those survivors. And here, just following up, this was the question I was asking, do the dead, the rebels, stay dead until the second resurrection? Well, that's what I favor, but I really don't know. Or do they rise in the first resurrection to participate in the land on the outskirts, but not as not as the remnant, not as those who were the obedient Israel? I don't think so. I don't think so. I just don't think so. But what about the living? And we talked about them. Do they stay scattered? Well, I don't think they stay scattered either. So these are the people living out amongst the people in the wilderness of the people who did not participate in the first resurrection. Do they stay out there? I don't think so, because I think this is the regathering of natural Israel. So let me summarize what I think I'm saying here. What I'm trying to say here is that we're going to have two components. We have that are going to, of Israel, that are going to participate. The remnant are the believers in obedience, and they will be resurrected in the first resurrection. The non-believers and the disobedient, the dead will stay dead until the second resurrection. They will not rise to participate in the land. But the living rebels who are non-believers and disobedient, they do not stay scattered. They regather into the land where they learn the ways and begin to learn how to follow Torah and acknowledge Yahweh as, now he has come, and they acknowledge him as their leader and as their Messiah, as their sovereign. So I think that's what's going to happen to the living. And it's these non-believers and disobedient that become the men, the natural men in the outer outlying areas, and even the priests, the Levitical priests and the sons of Zadok. I think they're the natural men. They represent the natural men that will exist in the land during the days of the millennial period and times after, until the second judgment occurs. Let me follow up with one last verse. I know this has gone very long, but let me go, because it's so critical to everything we do. It's critical to this conversation, the second Exodus, and what we are seeing with Jacob and Israel and Yehuda. So let me just read Jeremiah 31, and then we'll close it out here. So Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 1. No, let me get my pencil real quick here. Okay, so at that time declares Yahweh, I shall be the Elohim of all the clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. So at that time, I'm confident. This is the end times. This is his second coming. And this is the promise that he shall be the Elohim of all Israel, and they shall be my people. But what's really interesting is all the clans of Israel. So this is all of the tribes, not a split. So here you've got the Ezekiel tribes. The two sticks of Ezekiel put together in the hands to become one, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, now all together at that time. And at that time, when we are all resurrected, I shall be their Elohim and they shall be my people. Verse 2, thus said Yahushua, I'm sorry. Thus says Yahweh, a people escaped from the sword found favor in the wilderness. Favor where? Found wilderness in the wilderness of the peoples. We saw referenced in Ezekiel. I think so. Found favor in the wilderness of peoples. The peoples escaped from the sword found favor in the wilderness of peoples. Yisrael, this is the people in the midst of the wilderness of the peoples who found favor when it went to find rest. Now, I'm not sure what to do when it went to find rest. I thought I saw a reference someplace else about them coming into a rest, but I'd have to parse that a little more, because if they're in judgment in the wilderness of peoples, how are they at rest in the wilderness of peoples? Maybe we are talking about the remnant who is actually at rest and is not being undergoing judgment amongst the wilderness of people. They're in the wilderness of peoples, but they're not undergoing judgment there. And it's the disobedient rebels of Israel that are undergoing the judgment in the wilderness arena. Maybe that's how we describe what happened in World War II to the Jews and things like that. The many, many things that have happened to the people who have identified as Jewish and Judaism. I mean, we have the pogroms of Russia. We just have lots of persecution of this people groups, and maybe that is part of their judgment, that they're entered into in the wilderness of peoples. Maybe, and the remnant of Israel, maybe that is who went amongst the wilderness of people and found rest. Let's move on. Verse 3. Yahweh appeared to me from afar. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I shall draw you with kindness. And as my wife always points out, when you read kindness in this version, this is hasid. This is covenant loyalty. This is way more than kindness. This is way more than, I wish we would just leave hasid in the scripture. I mean, especially in the restored name versions, because hasid is so much more. It's all that comes with being in covenant with the Almighty Elohim. I shall draw you with hasid. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I shall draw you with hasid. I'm going to build you again, and you shall be rebuilt, O maiden of Israel. And again you shall take up the tambourines and go forth in the dances of those who rejoice. So this is the promises coming. Again you shall plant vines on the mountains of Shemaron, which is Samaria. The planters shall plant and treat them as common. So these are descriptions of the lands of the mountains of Israel, where we are, it's what do you call that? Agricultural. Verse 6, and there shall be a day when the watchmen cry on Mount Ephraim, arise and let us go up to Zion to meet Yahweh our Elohim. For thus said Yahweh, sing with gladness for Jacob, and shout among the chief of the nations. Cry out, give praise, and say, O Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel. So this is the resurrected people, and this is the cry to them, Yahweh, come and save them. And here's the promise. See, I am bringing them, the remnant of Israel, from the land of the north, and shall gather them from the ends of the earth. Here's your rapture. This is what I think is the rapture, that if you want to call it a second Exodus, that first gathering into the land while it's up in the heavenlies. Okay, see, I shall gather them from the ends of the earth, among them the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor, together a great assembly returning here. So, I've often wondered how to take this. I suppose if you're blind and lame and you're being regathered when you get your new body, you're not blind and lame anymore. But now those who are in labor, what does that mean? Does that mean that they're not pregnant anymore? I don't really know for sure what to do with that. This would be one of those passages that might lead me to think, okay, this is describing a natural, men of natural, bodies, making an exodus to the land in that time. Maybe, but I just don't think so. I think the whole thing is still describing the rapture. Verse 9, with weeping they shall come, and with prayers I shall bring them. I shall make them walk by rivers. So weeping, I think this is weeping for joy. And with prayers I bring them. So I think they are just looking up to the heavens, as we see in Luke, for the day draws near. And he takes them, all these people who are blind and lame, and all the people who are part of this remnant that he brings to land, and he makes them walk by rivers of waters in a straight way in which they do not stumble. So from going forward, they're going to have wonderful places to go and walk, and there's no stumbling anymore. And for I shall be a father to Israel and Ephraim. He is my firstborn. Hear the word of Yahweh, O Gentiles, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He who scattered Israel gathers him, and shall guard him as a shepherd his flock. Isn't that what we read in Jeremiah 16? Where he said, no longer shall we say Yahweh lives who brought him up from Israel from the land of Mitzrayim, but Yahweh lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands where he had driven them. Okay, so it's the same thing. In the isles far off, and say, He who scattered Israel gathers him, and shall guard him as a shepherd his flock. For Yahweh shall ransom Jacob and redeem him from the hand of one stronger than he. So Israel could not have. Jacob, none of us could on our own strength overcome what was before us. But Yahweh did it through us, through Yahushua, his Messiah. Verse 12, and they shall come in and shall sing on the height of Zion. This is Mount Zion. I think this is this city here. This is the height of Mount Zion up here. The height, when we get into Ezekiel, this is all on a very tall, very high mountain where we see this. And I think that mountain's going to be roughly in this area around Jerusalem where the current Mount Zion is. So they shall come in and shall sing on the height of Zion, and flow toward the goodness of Yahweh, for grain and for new wine and for oil and for the young of the flock and of the herd. And their being shall be like a well-watered garden, and never languish again. Then shall a maiden rejoice and dance, and young men and old together. And I shall turn their mourning to joy, and shall comfort them, and shall make them rejoice from their sorrow. Is this not what we read in Revelation? And shall fill the being of the Kohanim, which is the priest, with fatness, and my people shall be satisfied with my goodness. Oh, yes, declares Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh, a voice was heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter wailing, Rahel, which is Rachel, weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children, because they are no more. Thus says Yahweh, hold back your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, declares Yahweh, and they shall return from the land of the enemy. Now, I know in our gospel accounts, in the Gospel of Matthew, that when Herod goes through and destroys the children after the Messiah and his parents run off to Egypt, and then the children are destroyed, that crying, that wailing for the children, that whole period of time is described. This passage is used to describe that. And I'm not going to argue with that. How can I argue with the gospel account? But if you're going to come back to its origins, which is in Jeremiah 31, that is not the meaning here in Jeremiah 31. Because the point is, Rachel is weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. I think that means because they were killed. But that time that Herod did it in and around Bethlehem is not the first time their children were killed. Their children were killed when Assyria came. Their children were killed when Babylon came. Their children were killed when Greece came. It's been on and on that Rachel has lost her children when they would come around and lay siege, and we would have the cities and the children dying of starvation and just horrible things that are happening. And so Rachel being the wife of Isaac, isn't that the wife of Isaac? Rachel crying for her children, refusing to be comforted, because that's the picture that's drawn. And it's drawn for us in the gospel accounts, but here in Jeremiah, it's drawn referencing all of her children, not just those of the Bethlehem area. And the point here, though, is not that she lost her children and can't be comforted. It's Yahuwah comforting Rachel with this. He's comforting Rachel. He's saying, thus says Yahweh, hold back your voice from weeping, Rachel, and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work. There's something coming that overcomes, for the joy set before you and them. It's greater than what you've experienced. It's greater than the pain and suffering that they've experienced. Hold on from your weeping, Rachel. Hold on from your tears, because something greater is coming. A reward, declares Yahweh, and they shall return from the land of the enemy. Those who are alive and in the lands of the enemy, in the wilderness of peoples, will at his second coming come back into the land. But those who have died, Those that she's weeping for who are in Sheol now will also return from the land of the enemy. Wherever they are at, where they were killed and in Sheol at that point in time, they are coming back. They are part of the resurrection. And that's the point of this passage here that was utilized in Matthew and in a way hijacked. Because now when I speak to people who are trying to reconcile what they're reading and what the church has taught them from the new writings with what is written in the scriptures, they have a hard time with this, seeing it for what it is, because all they can see is what the Gospel of Matthew gave to us. And I'm not trying to take it away from the Gospel of Matthew, but I think the Gospel of Matthew is opportunistic in taking this passage to suggest it also applies to their situation there. And I don't argue with that. But the real context for Rachel is this period of time and this whole promised regathering and the reward for their work. And let me finish. And they shall return from the land of the enemy. But if we keep on going in verse 17, and there is an expectancy for your latter end, declares Yahweh, and your children shall return to their own country. So everybody that you've lost, living and dead, Rachel, are coming to their land. That is the reward for your work. If you will stay true, as Revelation tells us, to those who will stay in the work, stay in Torah, who will overcome to the end, endure till the end, there is a reward for that work. And the reward is this return, this resurrection, and a return into the land. Verse 18, I have clearly heard Ephraim lamenting. You have chastised me, and I was chastised like an untrained calf. Turn me back, and I shall turn back. You are Yahweh, my Elohim. So we have this referenced in Deuteronomy chapter 30, this chastisement and this turning back, when we turn back with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we see it in Jubilees as well. But there's this concept of Ephraim saying, yes, you've entered into judgment with me in the wilderness of the peoples where I have been, but turn me back and I shall turn back. So at your hand, I mean, this is a cry, this is a heart's cry. Yahweh Elohim, I desire you now. Help me in my desires, how I'm reading this, just my opinion on it. For after turning my back, I repented. This is his heart. And I was instructed. I struck myself on the thigh and I was ashamed, even humiliated, for I bore the reproach of my youth. Okay, so isn't this what we also just saw described in Ezekiel, where the people who come back, I don't know that it is the resurrected, but it could include the resurrected, but certainly it seems to include the natural born who come back from the lands around in that latter time, back to the lands of Israel, that are crying out and lamenting that they were so unfaithful to the covenant. All right, verse 20. Is Ephraim a precious son to me, a child of delights? For though I spoke against him, I still remembered him. That is why my affections were deeply moved for him. I have great compassion for him, declares Yahweh. Put up signposts, make landmarks, lay your heart toward the highway, the way in which you went. Turn back, O maiden of Israel. Turn back to these cities of yours. Come back. Till when would you turn here and there? And, O backsliding daughter, for Yahweh has created what is new on earth. A woman encompasses a man. This is a hard passage for me, but let me see if I can offer something here. Basically, he's saying in verse 22, he's saying, till when will you be turning away and running away and doing the things you should not do, O backsliding daughter? For Yahweh has created what is new on earth. And what is new on earth is the new Jerusalem, the new lands. And if the new Jerusalem is to be considered the bride ordained and married to the male husband, the Lamb, then what have we got when we have the bride of the Lamb coming to earth? Well, we have man living inside of her, the New Jerusalem. And so a woman, the New Jerusalem, encompassing a man. And is that what is new on earth? I don't know. I'm speculating. I'm inferring. But I've not heard that before. And I know this passage is difficult, but it seems to make sense as I study what is taking place in the reference to the New Jerusalem as the bride of the Lamb. Interesting. Let's move on. Verse 23. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, let them once again say this word in the land of Yehuda and in its cities when I turn back their captivity. Yahweh barak you, O home of righteousness, mountain of Kodesha, mountain of the separate. And in Yehuda and all its cities, farmers and those journey with flocks shall dwell together. Okay. So could this be a different could this be what I was describing? We have the rapture of faithful Israel, the remnant of Israel, but then we have the rebel Israels that survived. And is this a description of their journey with their flocks? And their farmers and the different people who journey back to the land with their flocks, and through, for whom the rivers are dried up and their sandals go across dry land, which were once rivers, because Yahweh is helping them come back to the land. I don't know. Verse 25, for I shall fill the weary being, and I shall replenish every grieved being. Well, is this natural men that are coming back? Maybe. Because I will tell you, the resurrected are not going to be weary beings. We will mount up with wings as eagles. We're not going to be grieved beings. At this I awoke and looked around, and my sleep was sweet to me. And then he goes on to say, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, that I shall sow the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda with the seed of man and the seed of beast. I do not claim to know what this means, but I speculate that this is a description of what I've been talking about. If we come back here and we have the resurrected people living here, and then we have natural men living out and about here. If the resurrected are living here around this area in the city, in Mount Zion here, and natural men are living out and about, and natural beast, beast of the flesh still are living out and about. So when we're saying in Jeremiah 31 that he has sown the house of Yehuda with the seed of man, the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and the seed of beast, is that what he's referencing? I think so. I've heard other descriptions of what that might be, but I think I'm favoring that. This is just simply what I have been describing, that in the New Jerusalem, in the mountains of Israel, there will be spiritual resurrected men cohabiting or living alongside of natural men who remain in the flesh, that still die. The resurrected never die. The natural men are yet to die, that one death. And it shall be as I have watched over them to pluck them, it shall be that as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, which is the judgment that has been taking place to them, so I shall watch over them to build and to plant, declares Yahweh, in the new land. In those days they shall no longer say, the fathers ate sour grapes and the children's teeth are blunted. But each one shall die for his own wickedness. Whoever eats sour grapes, his teeth shall be blunted. So I think, again, I'm speculating, and I don't know, just my opinion, but this is, there are children that paid for the sins of their father, but no more in those days. When men are living in that land, if they are going to sin and ultimately reject him, if they're living in the land, and ultimately reject him even during that period of time, because it seems evident that they might. Well, everyone who does reject will pay for their own wickednesses. If they're going to commit wickednesses, they're going to pay for their wickednesses and not their children anymore. I read that into it. Verse 31, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda. And this is the passage that we see in, this is what we see in Hebrews. And this is the time, this is what they've hijacked and think that now we're living in the new covenant. But this new covenant occurs when he makes it with Israel and the house of Yehuda. And he does it when the days are coming, which is the resurrection. It is the second coming of Yahushua. And it's not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. For this is the covenant I shall make with them, with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. There we have it. This is the end times when he's putting his Torah in their inward parts. And we, and I think maybe even the natural Israelites, will be able to walk more perfectly in Torah. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahweh. For I shall forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more. Thus said Yahweh, who gives the sun for light by day, and the laws of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who stirs up the sea and its waves roar. Yahweh of hosts is his name. And if these laws vanish from before me, declares Yahweh, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. Thus said Yahweh, if the Shemayim above could be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I would also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done, declares Yahweh. See, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, that the city shall be built for Yahweh, from the tower of Hananel to the corner gate, and the measuring line shall again extend straight ahead to the hill of Gareb. Then it shall turn toward Goah, and all the valley of the dead bodies, and of the ashes, and all the fields as far as the Wadi Kidron, to the corner of the horse gate toward the east, is to be Kodesh to Yahweh. It shall not be plucked up or thrown down any more. Extremely important passage that covers and deals with so much of what's going on in the church and so much of what we just discussed in this outline with this gentleman that I've been calling Aletheia. All right. Well, thank you. If you've been with me this long, I appreciate that you hung out this long. And thank you, Aletheia KM8JX, for giving me an opportunity to share on additional subject matter. Well, thank you, and may you all be Baruch.